The story begins in the burning place of Antair's empire capital Reifenheim, where there is a monster roaring so loud and fighting humans. Typically, monsters invade the human world, but in this story, this empire was invaded by heroes and militaries to kill the monsters living in this place. The military's commander-in-chief was watching the battle, and he said that their 2 million strong military was defeated by the evil demon that was summoned. His subordinate behind then added that 200,000 of their militaries died from the wide-range magic attack and the 300,000 were injured. The commander-in-chief then stated that the Demon King may have brought ruin to their nation and painted the world with evil, but he believed this would be the end, as he was sure enough that the head of the monsters, which is known as the evil Demon King, will die at the hands of the true heroes. At the heart of the great demonic palace Garak, specifically in the Hall of the Abyss, heroes were here to fight the so-called evil Demon King. One of the heroes, named Alex von Halen, confidently said that the evil Demon King couldn't do any more evil deeds now that they came to kill him and put him back in the dark world. The evil Demon King they called was sitting on his throne right in front of them. He was known as the evil Demon King Reifenhard Wald Antares, also our main protagonist of the story. He was the emperor of the Antares Empire. The Sword Saint Cyrus told him that they would eliminate him and bring an end to the history of this dark empire. That's quite upsetting. I put a lot of effort into constructing this empire. Why are you calling it a dark empire when it's called Antares? The sun rises here too, you know, Reifenhard replied. The martial king, Teslan, activates his flame while angrily saying, "You're growing demons here. When you are gone, the corrupt monsters' demonic nature will disappear too." Reifenhard doesn't like how Teslan called the beasts a demonic nature, since he only taught those beasts human tactics. Those beasts lived all their lives being mistreated, so he taught them a way to retaliate, so he could not believe how Teslan said they're corrupt. For him, those beasts were just doing things that humans do. At this moment, he asked the heroes if they had all defeated his 4 heavenly kings. Cyrus then answered yes and proudly said that the dirty orcs of Reifenhard don't match his sword. Upon hearing what he said, Reifenhard then concludes that Cyrus was referring to his brave great orc warrior named Tathat. Even if orcs may look barbaric, but for him, orcs are innocent species of hunter-gatherers and never betray their own kind. They also protect the weak and fight the strong, so he doesn't like these heroes treating those beasts as wild monsters despite the fact that they don't wash regularly. The 4 heavenly kings, the sickening monstrous troll just paid for their sins, Teslan said with crossed arms, and mentioning the troll made Reifenhard conclude that Teslan was referring to Gurat Athelka. He knew that trolls were a bit scary looking, but what Teslan said is too harsh for him, knowing that trolls were just nature lovers who focused on spirituality. Saintess Ellen then stated that those evil dwarfs who worshipped the god of darkness have also been brought to justice. Reifenhard was so upset since he knew it was Michelin. He also doesn't like how Ellen called the god of dwarves, Alpoth, as god of dark. For him, these heroes were so arrogant for thinking all gods other than the Slayer and the 12 gods are just evil beings. The Mage of Light, Jade Archlight, stated that they had sent the corrupt dark elf to the beyond and was no match to his magic. This time, Reifenhard was so mad and screamed that these heroes were begging to be killed. "You're finally showing your true colors." The dark elf was a demon that had fallen to the dark side. "We give no pity to such creatures," Teslan said. "Dark elf. Yeah, her skin might have been darker than yours, but it's because you humans cut down the trees and she had to evacuate to the barren lands. You're going to treat a pure-blooded high elf like a dark elf just because she got tanned," Reifenhard replied. The heroes then activate their powers while Alex utters that he will avenge the dead humans with his sword. Reifenhard was trembling in anger, knowing that these people won't really listen to him. He also questioned them as to who will avenge the otherworldly dead. Alex then screamed, saying that Reifenhard was so despicable. He also concludes that the monsters wouldn't have fallen to the dark side and lived their fated normal lives if it weren't for Reifenhard's evil power. Reifenhard possessed his magic power and the heroes started charging at him. To these heroes, otherworldly species are nothing more than species of the dark who want to live as more than slaves. And just for that, they think beasts are worth killing. "If that's the case, I will become the Demon King you wish me to be," Reifenhard angrily shouted. Despite that his magic is so powerful, the heroes still charged at him with the intention of killing him. Reifenhard this time started crying, thinking about the dead otherworldly species killed by humans. Reifenhard was an ordinary great mage, although being a great mage isn't very ordinary. Humans do not see otherworldly specialty as equal, intelligent creatures. Elves are seen as pretty servants who just happen to live long lives. Dwarves are slaves who are good with their hands and mining. Orcs are good for menial work. Trolls are used as ingredients for healing potions. They are seen as slaves with neither ego nor will. Reifenhard was incredibly shocked to find these beasts' forgotten culture and how deep it ran. He got to know the beasts himself and even their cultures. He got to learn spiritual magic from the elves and sorcery from the trolls. By combining them, he was able to reach 10-circle magic for the first time in history. He continued to interact with them, which changed his outlook on life. He could no longer watch them be treated as slaves and began rescuing them. It became harder to trick the humans as his territory grew, and the humans began sending knights to raid them. The humans continued to raid them, destroy things, and loot their lands, and Reifenhart and the beasts continued to move elsewhere. All they did was fight back when attacked, but they somehow ended up taking over more land and their town grew in size. It became bigger and bigger until it became the Antares Empire. He ended up establishing the Antares Empire, but it wasn't that he hated humans. He just believed that the otherworldly species were not inferior to humans. They did not carry out any kind of retaliation against the humans, and this is what came out of that. Even if the citizens of Antares all agreed that this was a great place to live, the humans argued that it was just the evil spell of the Demon King making them so. Reifenhart does understand why they would think that since his army consisted of ogres and goblins. They're not the prettiest species to exist. But to kill his people for a reason like that is unacceptable for him. He proclaimed that he has a duty to protect his empire, and if there was a law that allowed murder, he would eliminate that law and put a new one in its place. He attacked Alex with magic and Alex vomited blood and flew away then fell to the ground. Teslan was worried for his companion. Reifenhart at the same time stated that these people were just called as heroes because they're proficient with both the sword and magic, but in reality, he believes these so-called heroes haven't achieved mastery in either. To put it nicely, Alex for him is just well-rounded but not strong. He also concludes that heroes only survive to the end in stories. In reality, it's best to dig one well. He killed all the heroes until only Martial King Teslan left, the man known for his strong physique. The others were not difficult to defeat, but Teslan was different since this guy actually dug just one well. Teslan charged at Reifenhart with his powerful flame and tried to punch Reifenhart. Reifenhart luckily dodged, so Teslan ended up punching the ground, causing it to shatter. He runs to Reifenhart once more, stepping on the shattered ground and trying to attack. Still, he ends up punching the wall. Reifenhart ran away from him and just waited for a perfect chance. While running, he looked at Teslan and saw this strong guy jump toward him. Reifenhart immediately cast magic to block Teslan's fist, and Teslan at the same time screaming that the victory belonged to them. He then punched Reifenhart with his full force, causing Reifenhart to slam on the ground and spit blood. Reifenhart coughed and still dared to say that he blocked Teslan's punch with his magic. Teslan then said that he already expected it from the leader of demons. Reifenhart was suffering in pain and even felt that his spine was broken, which makes him believe that he might die at this rate. One thing in his mind is to kill Teslan, but then he believes there's no possibility of him winning against Teslan at this time. He stood while the flaming Teslan slowly walked toward him, saying that he would send Reifenhart to judgment. "Yes, you win, good for you," Reifenhart answered while holding his painful head. At this moment, Teslan assumes that the others will finally be free of their demonic restraints. Reifenhart grits his teeth out of anger. He plans to give up, but he can't. With how Teslan said that those other beasts would be free of their demonic restraints, it seemed like he meant that living as slaves is their natural fate, which Reifenhart cannot accept. It made him more mad and decided to still fight until his death. He summoned the Eye of Time and Space, a magical artifact he found in an ancient ruin that has a very powerful magic that even he, a 10 circle, has yet to decipher. Teslan then asked him angrily what he was trying to do. The Time and Space Regression Spell, a spell that turns back time and destabilizes God's providence. Reifenhart uttered. He started possessing the power of the artifact despite that he wasn't sure if it would work. At least, he wouldn't lose anything from it. He challenged Teslan to stop him from activating it, and Teslan then charged at him with a clenched fist. Reifenhart successfully activates the artifact, telling himself that he cannot die. Teslan grits his teeth the same as Reifenhart. Teslan punched the artifact Reifenhart was holding and a silhouette appeared where they were fighting. Two humans fought and suddenly vanished, leaving the artifact being activated. Meanwhile, the birds were chirping outside a house made of wood. The curtains inside the house were waving. The sound, the warmth, and the comfortable feeling felt by a young man residing inside. He woke up and immediately got up and was surprised that he was really alive. It seemed like he was Reifenhart. He cannot believe that he succeeded in using the spell that he couldn't decipher even half of it. "I know I'm a genius, but I didn't think it would work," he uttered. He was looking around, wondering where he was, and he concluded that he might have jumped the timeline, but still, he can't remember that he's in a place like this in his past life. His looks this time seem to be the young boy Teslan. There are a lot of questions in his mind, including his current age. He gets off the bed while he utters that most young men will cry over because of his physique. But the moment he checked himself in the mirror, he was puzzled since it wasn't the body he expected. What's with all these calluses? This body is all scarred and covered in muscles. It's so disgusting. A mage only needs to be skilled in magic. What's with this useless six-pack? He uttered. He knows that it was weird for him to comment about himself, but he still clearly remembers that his body during his youth swept several ladies off their feet. And after he got older, he became cooler and made several elves cry. Now, he was so confused with his looks and his face. What he expected to see in the mirror is his statuesque-like face, also in his eyes, his body looks more like a statue now. He tries to think of what happened, and he deduces that his time and space regression spell may have failed, which is why he's in some random guy's body. His current face looks familiar to him, but he never thinks about Teslan. He was thinking that he might not regress to the past, but might still be in the present and had instead switched with this body's soul. He described himself as a man with thick eyebrows, tenacious-looking eyes, and a stubborn mouth. If his torso gets larger, he's afraid he might grow facial hair. Fortunately, he remembered that he last fought with Teslan, and Teslan is a man that has facial hair and his appearance is the same as his current body. While he was thinking, he heard someone from outside calling Teslan's name. It was a man with a beard just like Teslan. The man entered Teslan's room while saying that the sun was high in the sky. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you coming outside?" the man asked, but Reifenhart, known as Teslan in this life, was startled to see a tall man entering inside the room. The man then told him that they should have another great day today. Reifenhart then asked the man who he was, and he even thought it was a monster. The man bent down and wondered why Teslan looked at him as if it was Teslan's first time seeing him. Reifenhart then answered with a stuttered voice that he asked because he really didn't know. The man then stated that Teslan used amnesia as an excuse twice, and he's sure that Teslan already knew this kind of excuse doesn't work anymore. He then pulled Teslan's head and informed him that they would now head to the training area. Reifenhart was confused, but looking at this situation, he concluded that this tall man was Teslan's teacher, the continent's strongest martial artist of all time, the former martial king Gerard Croc-Prodes. When they arrived at the training ground, Gerard tied Reifenhart to the tree. Reifenhart wanted to explain, but Gerard wouldn't listen to him and told him to stay quiet. He puts cloth to Reifenhart's mouth to stop him from talking, and he picks up a bamboo stick while declaring that they now start the training. Reifenhart was sweating as he was nervous about being beaten up helplessly. He wanted to scream so loud, but he couldn't because of the cloth in his mouth. Gerard then starts beating up Reifenhart with the bamboo stick, and Reifenhart cannot do anything but cry in pain. A part of his tummy started to get reddish and he tried to free himself from the rope, but he couldn't. He was wondering what this training is all about. Gerard continues beating him several times, even making him think of an elf, and concludes that this would be his end. Gerard was thinking at this moment that Teslan's hands felt a little strange earlier since it was a lot softer than before. Because of it, he comes to the conclusion that Teslan really has amnesia. Their martial clan, Jim Unbreakable, is hardworking. Since their training's trademark is simple, idiotic, and excessive, it's not unusual for the trainer to suffer from short-term memory loss. He even lost his memory a few times in the past. He smiled, knowing that there was a simple solution to this problem. That is to beat up Teslan more and more, believing that Teslan would feel better after getting beat up. While he was hitting Reifenhart numerous times, Teslan hoped someone would save him. Gerard then told him that the reason why humans used weapons was because they were weak, and that they have weak physiques, which is also the reason they rely on armor or weapons. While saying this, Reifenhart wondered why this man called humans stupid for using tools. That's an excuse. That's the shame of a person who couldn't overcome their weakness. Martial artists trained to overcome their weaknesses, Gerard screamed, and this is the first time Reifenhart heard such simplicity and logic in his whole life. Gerard then added that humans are the same as steel. The more humans are beaten up, the stronger they become, just like steel. Reifenhart was so annoyed hearing the useless words of Gerard. "You're the student I chose. Believe me, you have no physical limits. You can become steel," Gerard said. He wanted to let Teslan realize that not everyone can become stronger by training. Just like only high-quality iron can become steel, only a select few can have a steel-like physique. Then he meets Teslan and makes him his student. He hits Teslan's face with the bamboo stick and tells Teslan to think about the ocean and realize that the sea swallows everything but doesn't change. He also added that the ocean was inside of Teslan, so he must bring it out. One person Reifenhart was thinking at this point was the elf he was with in the ocean back then when he was still in his old body. Fortunately, the beating training was finally done and Gerard permitted him to go back inside and rest. Reifenhart was glad that he didn't die after receiving lots of beating. He hugged himself and gave thanks to Teslan's body for being so tough. The night had come, and Reifenhart was bobbing in red water that had jarrow leaves and petals that seemed to be a healing potion. Reifenhart was shocked knowing that a bottle of healing potion cost 10 silver coins, but to think there's a whole bathtub full of it. He heard that the queen bathes in milk to get great skin, but for him, it's nothing compared to this bathe with a healing potion. Gerard was standing beside the bathtub, so he asked him what was with this medicinal bath. And as per Gerard, it needs to cool the steel down after hammering it. After training the whole musculoskeletal system just shy of death, Reifenhart recovered quickly by using the power of aura and recovery potions. This way, he believes his current body will recover before it gets sick and will become stronger. Now, he realizes that the training method wasn't completely insane. He fought Teslan personally, so he knows how tough Teslan's body is. He's also sure Teslan repeatedly did this training since he was young. He goes deep in the water while thinking that he's certain this is in the past life. Since he possessed Teslan's body, he wondered where his body was and what happened to his body now. He wasn't sure if the young Reincarnate existed, and he questioned if two of the same souls exist in one time-space dimension. If it can, then he concludes he can construct two hypotheses. First, the future Reincarnate and he, the one inside Teslan's body, coexist with the young Reincarnate. Second, in the young Reincarnate's body is Martial King Teslan's soul. The next day, Gerard then gave Reincarnate lots of meat and asked him to gobble it up. Reincarnate then started eating it while Gerard was telling him that the overworked body needed to have its nutrients replenished. After eating, they go on a light jog to digest. "My disciple, are you tired? Or should we just continue our morning trading?" Gerard asked the moment he saw Teslan seemed very tired. But then, Reincarnate confidently answered that he wasn't tired at all. After their jog, they climbed into a tree and Reincarnate was ordered to hang in the branch and do sit-ups until Gerard ordered him to stop. At this moment of their training, Reincarnate already wanted to surrender in this brutish training. In the late afternoon, Gerard let him rest, but he couldn't sleep since he was still thinking about his situation. He reincarnated into the past Teslan, and he wondered what influence this would have moving forward. In the case that he exists as he did in the past, he wanted to know what would happen if the two souls came in contact. Each soul's uniqueness is the unchanging rule that is the foundation of the world. If they're unlucky, their soul may cease to exist. He also recalled that teenage Reincarnate didn't become active as a mage until 10 years later, but instead spent days studying hard, only reading books at the Delphia Magic Tower, so he believes he wouldn't possibly bump into his real body. Now, his problem is that Teslan has taken control of his body and will surely come after him. Teslan's strength comes from having trained his body with Gem Unbreakable, and there isn't much he can do to Reincarnate's body as long as he doesn't become a 10th circle. Gem Unbreakable is a training method Teslan definitely needs master's help for, and Reincarnate believes there's no way Teslan do it alone. Still, a part of him was thinking that Teslan might be able to find a way. In the middle of the night, he suddenly comes out of the house and makes sure Gerard is not outside. He was planning to run away from this prison. The moment he confirmed that Gerard wasn't outside, he immediately ran as fast as he could, and he was very determined to run away from Gerard and live on his own. While running, there was an aura following him, and to his surprise, Gerard suddenly appeared on the rock right in front of him. He was startled while Gerard asked him where he was planning to go. Reincarnate was so confused how Gerard got to this rock and caught him escaping. "You were quiet for a month or two, and now you're running away again. Is this the 9th time? We'll be in double digits soon." Gerard said, "I'm honestly not the boy named Teslan. My name is Reincarnate, I'm a mage." Reincarnate said, but then, Gerard believes he is just making a story to escape. Reincarnate cannot believe why Gerard won't believe him at all. But as per Gerard, Teslan said last time that he came from another world and met dragons and gods. He got more nervous and annoyed when Gerard added that Teslan claimed back then that he was an active master who reincarnated in the Eastern Continent's H1 Empire in the place called Murim. He patted Reincarnate's head and said that he was a bit convincing this time and that he had gotten better in terms of acting. He then ordered Reincarnate to go back inside the house and just sleep. To make sure that he would come back, he pulled Reincarnate with him while Reincarnate was still planning to escape tomorrow and make sure he succeeded. He claimed that he failed at prison breaking for today and acknowledged it, but he's confident he won't live trapped here forever. Many days passed, the different training of Reincarnate continued, and he still tried to escape, but Gerard always caught him, so he gave up on thinking that he could escape from Gerard, who didn't even know the meaning of giving up. Gerard told him that Gem Unbreakable has 130 years of disciple escape prevention methods, and there have been no disciples in their history who haven't faked an illness or tried to escape. And even if Reincarnate managed to escape, Gerard would definitely search to the ends of the continent and chase him down. For him, it's better to just officially get permission and climb down the mountain. The harsh training of Reincarnate still continued, and he received lots and painful beating from his teacher Gerard. Past the time of 2 years, he finally attained it and awakened his aura, and also succeeded in awakening aura. Reincarnate was so happy with what he had become. He heard that even Cyrus, who was praised as the Sword Saint, only awakened his aura in his late 20 seconds, so he was surprised that he easily attained this stage despite that he was not even 20 yet. "Why are you shocked? With the training of Gem Unbreakable, something like this is obvious," Gerard said. According to him, if Teslan stimulates the survival instinct along with physical training, the will of life increases his vitality, and that increased power manifests as aura. He was holding a mace while saying that this weapon doesn't even hurt right now for Teslan, so he threw it away and declared that they should now move to the next step. Reincarnate then asked him if they were now going to learn some normal martial arts, as he was hoping to descend the mountain soon enough. Unfortunately, Gerard declared that the next step is now sparring training with him. Reinhardt was so puzzled. He was scared knowing that his strength wasn't comparable to Gerard's strength. The sparring between them continued for 3 years. One day, Reinhardt went to the Vasily Kingdom in the southern region exactly at the Larchid Mountains, a deep rough terrain. There was a fall in this mountain, and in the middle of this falls is where Reinhardt did his other training. He possesses his awakened aura and prepares to attack using his Calamity Horn technique. This time, his aura became stronger compared to 3 years ago. His body also becomes more bolder. He composed his body, and the moment he successfully channeled all of his strength in his fist, he immediately charged at the mountain and punched it strongly. While doing it, he wondered if his third superposition was his limit, and he thinks he just has to do it a bit more for it to work. Calamity Horn is one blow that Reinhardt strikes after channeling all of his strength in one spot of his body. Because the sight of him concentrating on the aura looks like a horn, it got the nickname of Calamity Horn. He wasn't satisfied with his blow, so he was thinking of somehow polishing this to the 4th superposition. The Calamity Horn's final stage is the 9th superposition. The punch that sends 9 ripples can apparently even kill gods. But the Teslan he knew had 7 superpositions as his limit, and even his master Gerard could only perform the 8 superpositions. Gerard told him that he needed to at least reach the 4th superposition to descend the mountain. At this point, Reinhardt was aware that Gerard had gone down to the village for the first time in a while, so he believed Gerard would take this time and have a drink before coming back. He stares at his hand, remembering that in the past, he would have taken this as an opportunity and ran away. But now, he changed. He decided to end his stamina training here. He suddenly possessed some magic power and called Delphir Lastellan, wishing it to become the bullet made from air to hit his enemy. He attacked the tree in front of him with this power called Hero Bullet, but then, the tree only gained a scratch from his attack. He feels disappointed, thinking that his body isn't supporting him. Although he vividly remembers all of his magic knowledge through his artificial flashback, his mana isn't building, and this stone body of Teslan has no arithmetic ability, so he doesn't know if he can still become a mage. All of a sudden, he felt some energy which he believes doesn't belong to a human. He stares at the area where the energy came from and sees a beast come out and look at him. It was an orc holding a sword. Reinhardt was not scared at all, since beasts were his friends in his past life. "Human, you pretend you didn't see me, that I won't kill you," the orc said. Judging from the orc's size, Reinhardt believes that this orc is probably 3 or 4 years older. He also noticed that this orc seemed like a runaway and possibly escaped from somewhere like the arena. Reinhardt smiled a little, knowing that this orc was trying to talk it out since he was not hostile. Indeed, a prideful race that doesn't want unnecessary killing even in such a situation. "Young orc, is someone chasing you?" he asked. The orc was surprised by the fact that this human in front of him knew the language of grace. Reinhardt then proudly said that he had a fateful encounter. A blessed encounter it was indeed, the orc uttered, and he then honestly told Reinhardt that he was being chased. Reinhardt then offered to help him and asked him if he would trust him. The orc then told him that he was like a brother to him since he knew the language of grace. In addition, he can sense Reinhardt's genuine kindness in his very soul. But then, helping him, an orc, would only put Reinhardt in danger, so he doesn't want to accept the offer. Reinhardt was glad to hear an eloquent speaker orc, which made him believe that this orc is from a good bloodline. He then told the orc to trust him since he was confident with his current ability. He then activates a magic and informs the orc that this magic will conceal him. The orc was shocked and asked him if he was a mage. Reinhardt then questioned the orc if it was strange for him to be a mage, and the orc said yes because of his body. Reinhardt was too stunned to speak. Fortunately, the orc gratefully accepted his kindness and concealed the magic he activated. After the orc vanished, Reinhardt then heard irritable humans. These humans aren't alone, but a bunch of them. The man in the middle complains angrily for coming all the way here just to earn a few silver coins. This man seemed to be the leader of these hunters, and he asked Reinhardt if he saw a young orc pass by. The other man then said that they were willing to give gold coins as long as Reinhardt would tell them where the orc was. The head then whispered to this man since the gold coins were too much, but the man said that it was just a lie. The men then looked back at Reinhardt, but Reinhardt told them he didn't see any orcs in the area. But unfortunately, the hunters saw the orc's footsteps, so they climbed up and were about to follow the footsteps. Reinhardt was annoyed that his magic spell didn't even clear up the footsteps of the orc. With crossed arms, he told the humans that they couldn't just enter since this area was his dwelling. "Have you lost your mind? How dare a brat like you from the Blackwoods block our way?" the leader of hunters angrily said. He also boasted that they were a total of 10 knights. They blabber lots of words while Reinhardt remained fierce and still crossed his arms. He didn't dare to give way, but instead activated another magic while he recalled that his master Gerard told him that his fist was a deadly weapon that might kill someone in one swing, so he must show appropriate mercy to the weak. From this magic, he was able to summon a weapon. As Gerard told him, as someone who's stronger with bare fists than weapons, wielding a weapon is a mercy itself. He pointed his weapon at the humans and told them not to worry since they wouldn't die after they received a beating using this weapon. Jim Unbreakable's clan focuses primarily on unharmed martial arts, but that doesn't mean there's no weapon training at all. The men weren't scared of him at all. Reifenhart grits his teeth and hits the men one by one with his weapon. The remaining men then charged at him with swords, but he managed to hit them while he remained unharmed. However, the sole purpose of the club arts, the only weapon technique, is not for combat, but more to rigorously train disciples, so it specializes in striking all over the opponent's body. There are no defensive moves, only offense. While fighting them, Reifenhart believes that these mercenaries were making a living using their swords. Someone hit his back with a sword, but he wasn't affected at all. The sword was even crippled, which shocked the mercenary that owned it. Reifenhart then hit him, but at the same time, he was shocked that the sword didn't work on him. He knew this was now his own body, but this was a bit too much for him. In addition to this club art technique, its best part is that it doesn't kill any opponents. It was just for beating them, punishing them for challenging him. Knowing that this weapon wouldn't kill these men, he beat them up numerous times and told them not to worry since they wouldn't die with it even if their joints broke and their bones got smashed. The men received more beating and none of them was able to fight back. In the end, they trembled in pain and hoped someone would rescue them. The head of these mercenaries pointed his sword at Reifenhart and ordered him to say his name. "Tell you, it looks like you still haven't gotten your act together," Reifenhart answered. He then hit the man with his club and told him that it wouldn't be fair if he was fine while his friends were not. The men got up and decided to leave. Reifenhart's weapon was already broken, but he enjoyed beating the mercenaries, which made him think to take in disciples and give them a good beating later on. Unknowingly, he was getting influenced by Jim Unbreakable's philosophy. After the mercenaries left, the orc then came out and gave thanks for Reifenhart's kindness for helping him despite that he isn't a human. "Savior, I will not forget this day until my life ends. I'll surely repay your kindness," the orc politely said and even bowed down his head. Reifenhart then asked him if it was okay for him to bow down his head as a warrior so easily. The orc then replied that Reifenhart saved his life and even opened up a new path for him. He proclaimed that Reifenhart is now his mentor and he's willing to draw his sword for him when the time comes. In the culture of orcs, a mentor is seen as a guide in life, someone to be revered. It's similar to how a knight serves his lord for humans. This orc asked his name and he was about to answer Tessin, but then he thought it would be much better if he would bring his real identity. "My name is Reifenhart Valedictorian," he said, and the orc then promised to always remember his name. Since this world belongs to humans, Reifenhart asked the orc what's the destination in his mind. The orc then answered that the continent is vast, so he believes there must be some place for him to rest his body. If not, he would rather die wandering than live as a slave. Reifenhart then told him that beyond the Larched Mountains, a fortnight's walk to the southeast lies a nameless wasteland, a place the orc's kind calls it the land of trials, so the orc must go there. Reifenhart also heard that there were orcs who lived in hiding there, the Blue Bear tribe. The orc immediately ran, heading to the place Reifenhart mentioned, and while he was running, Reifenhart asked his name and he answered that he was the son of Crota, heir to Lat's axe, and his name was Tathid. As expected, Reifenhart was shocked since Tathid was his brave orc great warrior in his past life. Tathid is also one of his 4 heavenly kings. He was the chief of the Blue Bear tribe and later became the grand chieftain of the orcs. At this moment, Reifenhart was wondering if the original Teslan met Tathid in the previous life as well. But considering Teslan's personality, he believes Teslan wouldn't have helped an orc. "Seems like fate has taken a turn," he uttered. He was staring at Tathid from above while thinking that it was a fascinating, fateful encounter. He smiled, remembering his empire and his people, also his past appearance. He was hoping that all of them would meet someday. These beasts are his true friends and family, a descendant of the brave warrior. Another half a year has passed since the strange encounter with Tathid. Up until this point, Gerard still trained Reifenhart and taught him the Kai bullet technique. The flame scares Reifenhart so much, but he managed to activate his spiral guard on time and blocked the attack. Gerard was so proud of him for doing the right thing, and he said that Teslan's spiral guard had ascended to a summit. "I remember it like yesterday when you insisted that Teslan is Reifenhart after taking too much beating," he said, and Reifenhart was annoyed and asked him why he needed to bring up something that happened 6 years ago. As per Gerard, it's already been 6 years since he started teaching Teslan, and now he can see that Teslan has gotten quite stronger since then. However, he cannot explain why Teslan is still so small. "What do you mean small? I'm over 190 centimeters, Reifenhart answered. Gerard then angrily said that a member of the Jim Unbreakable should be over 2 meters at least, the same as the first Martial King Valkenschut, the second Martial King Calbrain, and the third Martial King Rastal. He grabbed Reifenhart's head and angrily asked him if he was consistently following the breathing technique he taught him. Reifenhart remembered that the Teslan he met back then was really around 2.3 meters too. He just told Gerard that he thinks it's just a matter of the constitution. The fact is that he doesn't want to get bigger than his size now, and if he uses the breathing technique now, his body will surely become monstrous, which he doesn't want to happen. Luckily, the thing that matters more for Gerard is that Teslan is sturdy enough. He then ordered Reifenhart to show his final result of training. Reifenhart then possessed his aura, which made his eyes sparkle, and he surprisingly jumped so high. He then possessed his Calamity Horn technique and ready his fist to punch while he was heading back to the ground. He then punched the ground with his 4th superposition Calamity Horn, and this attack shattered the ground and made the water from below splash strongly. Gerard then guffas, seeing his student's excellency. With the current strength of Reifenhart, Gerard believes that his student cannot take a beating from someone. Reifenhart was speechless that after a year, he finally did the 4th superposition Calamity Horn. It seems it's almost time for you to head out to the outside world, Gerard stated, but Reifenhart was confused. You've done a great job, Reifenhart, my disciple. You're free to leave as you want now. I am indifferent to whether you become a person of good or evil. Leave the life that you want, Gerard stated, which surprised Reifenhart. Gerard then told him that it was the price of the training he had endured until now. Reifenhart was speechless and he only uttered the name of his master. According to Gerard, there's something their 3rd martial king, Master Rascal, told him 60 years ago and told him to always remember it. First, it is fine to accumulate wealth, but try not to gain in just once. At that time, Gerard was confused since Rascal also told him before that it was fine for him to become a villain. Rascal then explains to him what he was saying is that if he supposedly wants to, at least he should be a dignified villain or have a style at least. Second, Gerard must stand by the side of the unjustly treated whenever possible, since it is better to live praised and respected. For Rascal, being weak doesn't necessarily mean being unjustly treated. After all, the world is full of those weaker than him, and it is up to him how he distinguishes the weak. Last one, the third, which is the most important. He should make sure to continue the martial legacy of the gym unbreakable at any cost. Gerard also said those 3 things to Reifenhart, and he wants him to find a disciple to inherit their great teachings. Reifenhart then said yes and promised that he would take it to his heart. It is no easy task to find a talented child right away, so you need to dwell on this for the rest of your life, but when such an opportunity comes your way, don't let it slip away, Gerard added while throwing a pouch bag to Reifenhart, saying that it had his clothes and travel expenses. Reifenhart opened the small pouch and saw that there were 30 silvers inside. This amount disappoints Reifenhart since he thought Gerard had wealth in the Vasily kingdom, and also, Gerard mentioned back then that he had a mansion in the capital, so he was expecting Gerard to give him more. Though this is half a year's worth of living expenses for a commoner, but for him, it's a little. As per Gerard, their martial clan has a set payment given to those who descend the mountain. And nowadays, they have raised the fee to move with the inflation, but back in his days, it was around 25 silvers. He also handed a map to Reifenhart while telling him that he could find a small present that he had personally left at the Settlard Mountains, and he just needed to follow the map. He can visit the place anytime if he wanders nearby. Reifenhart then checked the map, and after that, he then prepared to leave. Before he could leave, he looked back at Gerard while thinking if it was really fine for him to descend in the mountain. Also, he wasn't sure if he'd really been freed from here. All of a sudden, a strong fire technique appeared made by Gerard. He got scared and uttered "Mamma Mia." He then saw Gerard, hoping that he would not mourn over partings and would run with an iron resolve without looking back. For him, his disciple Tessin is the inheritor of the greatest teachings on earth. Reifenhart immediately ran away from him while screaming in fear, thinking that his master would beat him once more. Several days in the faraway village, the chief of the village went to the inn where the noble knight resided just to ask for payment. His subordinate tried to stop him, knowing that it was very dangerous, but the old man wanted to say what he needed to say. As he entered inside, the noble knight asked him what was the matter. The village chief then requested him to make the payment of the food that he and the other knights have had until now. This knight was annoyed and flicked 1 gold coin to the village chief, believing that this 1 gold was enough. The village chief catched it and stared at it for a while, so the noble knight thought that this old man had probably seen a cut for the first time. But then, the old man bravely said that this 1 gold wasn't enough for everything they had consumed. The noble knight is mad and concludes that the old man thinks he doesn't know the market price since he's a noble. "How dare you make a mockery of a knight?" he said while punching the helpless old man. The village chief looked at the noble knight with anger, since he didn't like how this knight was as good as bandits and took over their homes and hoarded their food, all for a measly ducat without considering the transportation and labor costs. "What's the matter, Sir Edward?" a man who suddenly came asked. The noble knight, Edward, then answered that it was nothing. He called this newcomer as young Lord Stefan, and behind him was an elf. Truly despicable individuals. "This is why you must not pay mercy to peasants, since they lose the sense of their places," Stefan stated. At the same time, Reifenhart remembers the time when he was with the lady elf named Cirrus. That time, Cirrus loved his thin body, since for her, Reifenhart looked so sharp and precise with it like a well-made blade. That time, he was perfect in the eyes of Cirrus because of his body, so now it was problematic that he looked more like an ultimate stone golem weapon. But then, he was glad by the fact that he looked taller now than in the past. He was standing at the window while he concluded that Cirrus of this time would probably be 70 and he guessed that would be about 17 in human age. He was now in the Krom, the city in the south of the Vasily Kingdom. He remembers that Cirrus would get sold next year, so she should be at Chatton's slave auction. He was thinking about what he should do and he came to the idea of destroying the auction site and freeing the lady. But then, he believes that if he does something as reckless as that, it will make it hard to regain his magical powers, so he decides to just resolve it with money. The price of elf slaves is astronomical, and he's broke at the moment. But that is fine with him. He possessed this powerful body technique as well as memories of the future. Now that he thinks about it, he thinks he heard that there's an ancient ruin on the way to Chatham. At the other village, Stefan went to a mage and asked if he still could not figure out the location of the ancient ruins. The mage then told him to wait a bit more since he was still in the process of searching it. This mage is Todd, 35 years old, and he's located at Delphia's Mage Tower and was known as a mage specialized in archaeology. After a few more minutes, Todd finally locates the direction of the ancient ruins which were in the mountain and where the renowned swordsman Claude von Leader's Altian was buried. It has been 3 days since Reifenhart left Krom. He's now heading north toward the Hatton Mountains on the Central Road. He did hear that the former martial kings went around topless even in the winter, although he didn't want to do that. Artificial flashback, a secret technique of the ages that allows him to revive his memories at any point in time. He used that to recall his memories about the ancient ruins of the Hatton Mountains. Before his regression, there was a mage named Todd whom he met at Delphia's Mage Tower, and that mage told him that he explored those ruins with the Altians. He has actually been there in his past life too. He managed to find the real treasures that Todd's party missed. He sold all of them and got more than 2,000 gold coins at quite a profit. After a long walk, he finally arrived at the cattle village. One of the buildings in this village is where the people are discussing what they should do, knowing that the Valley of Death isn't a place they are allowed to go near. The old man then said that the nobles demanded a guide and something dangerous might happen to them if they rejected them. Some of them were mad at the nobles, but the old man told them to turn down their voices to make sure nobles won't hear them. The other man also said that he would go and guide the nobles. He even prepared his bow and arrows while saying that he knew the mountains the best in the village, and he was also confident he was the only one viable candidate. His wife cried and was worried for him. Even his daughter. Deep down inside him, he doesn't want to go, but he wants to save the people in their village from the nobles. The other men cheered him, saying that he could do it. I can go if you don't want to, Reifenhart suddenly said while his face was sunk in the window. Ted, the one who volunteered, was startled and immediately aimed his arrow at Reifenhart. Reifenhart then told Ted that he was just a passerby who happened to overhear their conversation. The people let him enter and asked him if he really knew the way to the Valley of Death. He said yes confidently and informed them that he had already gone to that place before. One man then informed him that no one had ever come back alive from the Valley of Death. Still, Reifenhart was very determined to go, and he knew these people would be grateful to him for saving their lives. The Valley of Death is called a dungeon. The remnants of the Silver Age, a long-forgotten time period. 50 years ago, there was a knight from the Altians known as Claude. At the young age of 45, he managed to awaken aura. He went on all kinds of adventures, and his heroic stories were spread all over the Vasily Kingdom. But fame creates arrogance. Claude went into the Valley of Death with just one servant and died. The problem was that the demonic sword Altian that he took with him was also lost there. The demonic sword Altian is the symbol of all the Altian family that has been passed down for generations. The efforts to find that sword went on for more than 50 years. At this time, Reifenhart went together with the nobles, including Stefan von Rapanto Altian. Reifenhart was staring at Stefan, thinking that this guy was the grandson of Claude. Letitia, the sword with Stefan, said that Stefan is so graceful even without a horse. Stefan then said that he felt better upon hearing her words. Staring at the elf, Reifenhart instantly believes that the lady is a slayer elf, and he could say that both were having fun together. Reifenhart also noticed that there was just one saint in this party, and he concluded he was Sillin, who looked so young, and he wondered if this person could now use proper divine spells. Sillin looked like a lady, but the fact is that he's a male. Besides Sillin was Todd, and Reifenhart wanted to approach him since it was nice for him to see Todd once again after so long. But then, he can't open a conversation since both have been so deep in conversation. He still remembered that he and Todd even rambled during their younger days. Now, he feels a different atmosphere between Todd and Sillin. He then concludes that Todd likes Sillin, which shocked him, thinking that Todd might be gay. While thinking, Edward talked to him, telling him that he made the right choice. Reifenhart then deduces that Edward was referring to him for choosing them to guide the way. He said it wasn't a big deal. Edward then mentioned the villagers were all too scared to take the job. Reifenhart then said that it was understandable that those villagers were scared. What could possibly be so scary when the kingdom's brave knights are accompanying us? Edward answered. And because of his arrogance, Reifenhart was so annoyed at him. Reifenhart believes there really is no knight in the world who isn't full of himself, and that chivalry makes narcissists out of men. While heading their way, they suddenly heard a loud scream. Every one of them was clueless, and a strange thing appeared and headed their way. It turned out that it was a monster. These monsters transformed and charged at the humans. Stefan then declared that it was an ambush and he commanded them to get into their formation. These monsters are hairy, with flaming eyes, and have sharp nails like birds. How dare you disgusting monsters try to attack us, humans blessed by Slayer, Letitia said. And Stefan at the same time ordered his men to attack. Todd then attacked the monsters using his fire chain and he eliminated some of the monsters. Dear Phalanans, please permit them fortitude and bravery, Sillin uttered. While they were all fighting against monsters, Reifenhart was shocked watching and he could see that everyone wasn't bad at fighting, especially Stefan. Of course, that's from the perspective of a mage. If he considers their skills from a martial artist's point of view, they're all pitiful. He then remembers his master Gerard and tells himself that his master isn't prideful for no reason. There were also orcs traveling with them and they were porters. This time, one monster charged at the orcs so Reifenhart interfered and killed the wild monster with his fist. The monster broke into pieces, and Reifenhart was relieved that no one saw his technique. If Todd's adventure story was true, Reifenhart concludes that Ted would have died in this place. The captain of this expedition is the Altian family's Stefan. Reifenhart can't say if he's a bad person, but he can really see that Stefan really doesn't care about his surroundings, which would be the reason why the guide would surely die. During the commotion, Sillin noticed that Reifenhart was just standing still, so he instructed him to hide behind a tree since it was too dangerous. This time, Reifenhart then deduces that Sillin is a bit better than Stefan. The monster suddenly attacked Sillin with its feather technique, but then Reifenhart didn't feel any pain at all. He was confident that these things couldn't hurt him, not until he was struck in his eyes, causing him to scream. He then punched the monster who dared to attack him while saying that there were still tears left in him that he hadn't cried during training. After they all ended the monsters, Edward then reported to Stefan that mages and priests were safe. Reifenhart was so disappointed that these people didn't even check the normal travelers. The Altian knighthood is strong, Stefan screamed. He then gave everyone permission to have a rest and told them to enjoy the happiness of victory to their heart's content. Since Stefan permitted them to rest, Reifenhart then used the opportunity to talk to Todd. Thank you, Mage. I survived, thanks to you, he said. Well, something like this is no biggie, Todd replied. Knowing that Todd was from Delphia's Mage Tower, Reifenhart informed him that he had a friend in that place. He lied that the name of his friend is Reifenhart and he asked Todd if he knew him. Todd knew the kid's name and he could not believe that Reifenhart had a rough friend. Todd then said that Reifenhart is quite a cute child and kind. Reifenhart feels weird upon seeing his face look disgusting. Todd then asked why he asked about Reifenhart, and the real Reifenhart then answered that he was just wondering if Reifenhart was doing well or if something happened recently. As per Todd, Reifenhart was spending his days well learning magic. Reifenhart asked if nothing weird had happened in the last few years, but Todd didn't think so. He just mentioned that Reifenhart's nose bridge is as high as ever and has eyes as jewels plus smooth skin. Listening to him makes Reifenhart think that he's like Gerard, only caring about the physical body but in a different way. He was annoyed seeing Todd drooled while saying something about Reifenhart, and Reifenhart then asked if there were any changes in the attitude of Reifenhart. But then, Todd wasn't sure since he was not really interested in the child's thoughts or actions. Sillin suddenly approached him and asked if he was hurt. Reifenhart then answered he was fine and told him to look over the orcs. Sillin listened to him and checked the orcs if they were really fine since they kept on saying they were unharmed. While checking the orcs, knights approached him, telling him that these orcs would get better even if they just lick themselves, so he shouldn't waste his energy on these creatures. Sillin chose to ignore them, which makes Reifenhart glad. But then, although he's kind and heals the orcs, the way he treats them is like he's treating a dog or cat, not people. Reifenhart believes that the biggest issue in this world is people's fundamental values, and he believes that the path for some species to find rights is far and rough. After a few minutes of resting, Stefan then called Reifenhart and commanded him to immediately lead the way. After going straight, take a right. There is a stream in front, so please decelerate. Reifenhart answered, and Stefan was annoyed hearing his eerie voice. A few hours later, the knights looked very tired since they had fought a basilisk, a dire wolf, and even more than 20 ogres. They were so confused as to why a lot of monsters appeared in this small mountain without knowing that Reifenhart intentionally didn't take the existing path and decided to just brutishly keep going forward. Do you perhaps need a rest? He asked. But no one responded, and Stefan at the same time angrily screamed, telling all his people to get up. Reifenhart believes that these knights are arrogant and clerics are too serious, mages are narrow-minded and cheap, and he's a mage to the bone who didn't take the knight on the fastest route. So this is the place that drove Sir Claude to death. To think there'd be so many monsters in this tiny mountain, Stefan uttered, and he was speechless after finally seeing the ancient ruins. He widely smiled the same as Edward while looking at the ancient ruin, a Palton. They directly headed to the Palton and 5 of them including Reifenhart stood outside the entrance while the knights stood below them. Todd pointed to the entrance and said that he thought it would be okay to enter. Stefan then commanded everyone to get ready. Reifenhart said then he'd just wait outside, but Stefan told him he could go back home since his job is done. Reifenhart then said that he had no way of getting back to the village on his own, and since he really worked hard, Stefan decided to protect him on the way back. Reifenhart was waiting for them all to enter. Stefan then said, "A great being is asleep in there. Let's accept his wishes. Let's find the demonic sword Altian." The knights then cheered and all of them headed inside while Reifenhart waved at them and wished them luck. None of the knights left and only Reifenhart left outside. He then smiled and said that it was time for him to do his work now. Right now, this place, the ancient ruins of Palton, is full of monsters and spirits, but originally, in the Silver Age, it served as a type of logistics base and was used as a normal military building. Even if it was normal, the technology in the Silver Age was like a miracle in today's age, so it's quite valuable. He entered the secret entrance while remembering that he already investigated this place with Cirrus and were so happy together. It was Cirrus who found the sylphs whispering into the wall, which she believes is a secret path. Back then, they managed to open it and Cirrus kissed him that day. Recalling the things he and Cirrus did in the middle of a danger zone makes him feel thrilled and drool. He arrived at the second secret path and still remembers that the password had Libra's left as a base mixed with Aqua and Terra's seal in reverse. Luckily, he basically has the answer in his hand. It's not as easy as he thought because he doesn't have enough mana and he blames Teslon's body's brain. Fortunately, the secret path had opened. He then took off his clothes, but he didn't throw it away since he spent 10 silver coins on it. He was stretching his body first to try to start testing his physical abilities. While he was stretching, he suddenly heard a scream. He was so confused since the screams came from the right side while he remembered that the humans he guided were headed to the left side. He then realizes that the secret path is the back door that connects with the 3rd floor of the basement. If this opens, it's a type of trespassing situation. Upon thinking about the trespassing situation, he suddenly flinched. He remembered more knowledge from his past life that this place was a military building. The mana system activates all sorts of security features to try and repel the trespassers. In the past, Cirrus and he came on their own in this dungeon, so they didn't need to worry about other places, but right now, the Altian group is in the basement. They were obviously caught in a trap and fell to the 2nd floor of the basement. Because of his conclusion, Reifenhart got nervous thinking that they were screwed now. The knights who fell on the 2nd floor were killed by the monsters residing on that floor. Stefan remained and he witnessed how his companions got killed. He saw the monster's weapon, its face, and its huge body. The monster isn't alone, but there are several of them, which makes him believe that they, humans, cannot beat it. At the other part of the dungeon, Sillin treated the wounded knights. They were all so happy without knowing that Sillin only kept them alive for him to also survive. He almost died after the floor suddenly collapsed and he gave thanks to Todd that he was saved because of his protection magic. Todd then said that they may have avoided a crash, but whether they can survive in the future remains uncertain. They continue their exploration, but the one suddenly who's in front is suddenly attacked. The monsters then appeared from the upper floor and many of them were harmed. The knights immediately run away while screaming in fear. Sillin then used his ability, praying to his dear Phalanans to strike down corrupt beings with a mace of light. His mace of light floated above him and granted everyone a wavering courage to fight. Deep inside of him, he was disappointed to see how the knights of Altian wanted to flee. Still, he continued to grant everyone a blessing. The knights grip their swords and they suddenly turn into berserker mode and charge at the monsters, which shocked Todd and wondered how much divine power Sillin cast to them to turn them into berserkers. This time, they looked like they were high on drugs and the courage Sillin blessed to them is now visible. They fought against monsters and Todd at the same time cast his magic power and fought with his iron steel. Letitia also bravely fought. She managed to hit some monster, but unfortunately, she got stabbed, so she let go of her weapon and fell down. She was in severe pain and she needed help, hoping Stefan would come to help her, but then Stefan appeared but didn't assist her and just said that she did a great job. She collapsed while Stefan charged at the monsters. He bravely slashed a monster and killed it instantly. Edward and the other knights were glad to see him still alive after he fell on the 2nd floor. Everyone, get yourselves together. This is where Sir Claude, the Great Knight, was defeated. Stefan screamed. A strong blow of flame then appeared above them and something suddenly exploded. A scary-looking monster that was covered with flame and was also a huge one stood in front of them. This monster blows fire and hits numerous knights. Stefan told them not to falter, but the strong flame made everyone scared and tried to run away. Even Stefan feels the powerful flame of this monster and he is so annoyed while telling himself he can't just die so easily. He grips his weapon and charges at the monster. He jumped and confidently claimed that he was the one who upheld the name of Altian, the one who had earned the title of Resolute. He attacked the flaming monster using his shooting stroke technique, but he was punched in his face, causing him to spit blood. He let go of his sword and bounced back and lost consciousness. Now, seeing him unconscious makes Sillin nervous but still continues to use his magic power, trying to destroy the corrupt beings with his light. He attacked the flaming monster with his mace of light, but the monster was unharmed and now stares at him with anger. Sillin rattled. He was trembling in fear and he saw that the flaming monster rushed to him. He closed his eyes and gritted his teeth, but before the monster could hit him, it suddenly flew away. Sillin opened his eyes and saw Reincarnates standing in front of him. Reincarnates was covered with his powerful aura and it turned off when he saw the monster's flame suddenly disappear. He then saw that the monster died in just one strike from him. Because of it, he realizes why he almost died after receiving one punch from Teslan back then. He then looked at the people and saw most of the knights unconscious. For now, he decided to move these people to a safe place. More monsters headed to them, but he still continued to head to the upper floor while carrying Letitia and easily killed each monster barehandedly. Seeing his unbelievable strength makes the remaining knights and also Todd and Sillin dumbfounded. Meanwhile, Stefan finally regained consciousness. Upon seeing his surroundings, he was shocked to see corpses of monsters. He then asked Edward about what happened, and after receiving a response from Edward, he was shocked as he couldn't believe that their guide, Reincarnates, was a martial artist. He then approached Reincarnates and admitted that he failed to recognize someone of such esteem. He asked Reincarnates' name, and since Todd knows about the boy named Reincarnates, he just told Stefan that his name is Rifen. Edward was thinking of someone with this name, but then he realizes that it was his first time hearing this name, and because of it, he doubts that Rifen was really strong, since for him, if Rifen was really strong, he should have heard of him. Stefan at the same time asked Reincarnates about his family's background, but Reincarnates answered that he didn't have one either. Stefan was shocked to know that Reincarnates was just a regular person. He really thought that Reincarnates was a noble's child traveling for experience. And now, it turned out that Reincarnates was a regular person with no background to show unsightliness, which he didn't expect. Looks like you wrapped up what we pretty much finished. You've done an okay job, you were a decent help, he said while tapping Reincarnates' shoulder. But then, Reincarnates pushed his hand away and told him that he was the one who wasn't of much help. Stefan was mad at him and told him that he must show respect to the Altian family. Edward asked him to calm down and said that a normal person doesn't really know about the etiquette. Stefan then agreed, since for him, Rifen is someone who doesn't have a proper upbringing. He then asked Reincarnates who taught him, and Reincarnates answered with annoyance that he just picked up his abilities anywhere. Knowing that his master Gerard is known throughout the world, he can't just blurt his name out loud. In addition, he doesn't want Stefan to know of his movements either. Stefan won't believe him since he has unbelievable moves, but then, Reincarnates really doesn't want to say anything and just tells him to spend his time taking care of the injured instead of taking his time investigating him. The way he talks makes Edward think that this guy is talking so casually and feels so natural. This time, Reincarnates pointed at the knights, reminding Stefan that these men needed help. He was aware that Edward was thinking of his way of speaking as full of hubris. It's something they can only see from a person in high places talking down to their underlings. To not even take age into account, unless he really doesn't care about anything, he could be a royal of another country, as Edward was thinking. Right now, Edward is starting to see through the origins of Reincarnates' hubris. The way of his speech is as if someone older is talking down to their younger counterpart. And because of it, Edward sees him as a strange person. "Excuse me, you said that your name is Rifen, right? How tall are you?" Sillin suddenly asked from behind, and Reincarnates then answered that he must be around 192 centimeters. Sillin's eyes sparkled and asked him about his weight. But then, Reincarnates doesn't know since he hasn't really weighed himself. Sillin was so curious about him. He asked what training Reincarnates had encountered to achieve his body, and Reincarnates answered that he hit, ate, and lifted a lot. At the same time, he was wondering why this guy was acting friendly all of a sudden. Sillin Phil Maris, who had lost his parents early and was raised in the orphanage, was often picked on as he was weak and pretty looking. Maybe it was because of that he started too long for what he did not have: a healthy body and a deep and loud voice. At one point, he even dreamed of becoming a monk who provided their devoutness through their body. But the reality was far from his expectations. His height didn't change and puberty never came, and for some reason, his hair grew really fast. Despite having such a weak body, he tried to do weight training with the hope of overcoming it, but the only result was an increase in his divine power due to him treating his injuries from the training. As such, he started looking up to people that were muscular, just like what happened to him now while he was staring at Reincarnates. The way he stares makes Reincarnates overwhelmed and decides to run away, reasoning out that he needs to scout the exit. But then, Sillin changed him and offered help. Reifenhart then asked him what happens to those people who get injured while he's not around. Because of what he said, Sillin felt down knowing that Reifenhart was right after all. Stefan overheard them, so he offered to go with Reifenhart and commanded Letitia to just stay and help out everyone. He went to Reifenhart and asked if it was fine if he would go with him, and Reifenhart then told him to do what he pleased. They both headed to the entrance, and at this moment, even if it's just a coincidence, Stefan can't help but acknowledge Reifenhart, considering they received help from him. He concludes that Reifenhart this time is feeling proud of himself for being able to aid a knight. Just the fact that Reifenhart is taking the lead to do whatever he wants is evidence for Stefan that Reifenhart is looking down on them knights. Now, he was looking forward to seeing Reifenhart deal with things when a demon appeared. He was expecting that Reifenhart would be impressed by him once he showed his skills and put Reifenhart in his place. He hopes that a demon would come out sooner, but then, he suddenly spits saliva the moment Reifenhart hits the back of his head. "We're almost there, so take a nap," Reifenhart said, and Stefan was instantly knocked out and fell on the floor. The monsters then appeared, roaring so loud, but Reifenhart easily killed them barehandedly one by one. He eliminated all the monsters in the area, and now that he took care of the hindrances, he then walked and headed to the treasure's location. He entered a room and tried to search, and after a short time, he luckily found the limitless bag, a magic tool that allows the user to store items up to 10 times the size of the bag, and the weight will be reduced to a tenth. He started to pick up some items, and he recalled that there should be one more thing aside from this bag. It should be a heavenly brazier, the returning dagger, magical sapphire, and a lot more expensive items. After collecting some of the treasures, he went back to Stefan to check him, and Stefan regained consciousness and asked what happened. Reifenhart then lied that he was hit at the back of his head by a monster and instantly knocked out. As expected, Stefan was so annoyed as he felt so unlucky since his plan didn't go through. He forcibly gave thanks to Reifenhart as he thought Reifenhart didn't leave him alone in the area and even saved him from being killed by monsters. "It's not worth mentioning," Reifenhart replied, but deep down inside him, he still had more plans to knock Stefan out again. While Reifenhart was cleaning up the ancient relic site, Stefan had to be knocked out 3 more times. Reifenhart was hoping that he didn't mistakenly hit Stefan wrong, but he believed it would still be fine as he was sure that Stefan would still live a good life after beating him several times. When Stefan woke up for the 4th time, he already felt strange. He's being vigilant, but he can't detect anything. He then concludes that there might be something wrong with him, so he tells himself that he must eat some supplement for his body once he gets back. Since the limitless bag of Reifenhart was already full, he decided to come back for the rest some other time. "Looks like we've covered most of the paths. Let's go back," he said. Meanwhile, all of them were gathered and they all headed somewhere else. While walking, Sillin was beside Reifenhart and told him that he could become a royal. Reifenhart then said that he was just a regular citizen. Still, Sillin can't believe it since Reifenhart is very capable. Reifenhart then said that a regular citizen can also be skilled. "It's not that. It's just the way you talk down to people seems so natural," Sillin stated. Reifenhart was still confused, so Sillin explains that as a martial artist, he understood that Reifenhart had to be confident and could talk down to someone like Stefan. But he didn't expect that Reifenhart talked down to Edward, who is well over 40. Reifenhart then understood it. He realizes his behavior as he remembers that he's 22 in this life, so he should be careful. He then casually told Sillin that he's not used to meeting people, so his etiquette isn't great. After a moment of walking, they arrived in another room. Stefan then opened the door, and all of them, including Reifenhart and Sillin, were shocked to see a scary monster. This monster is known as Growlbeast. Reifenhart was staring at this monster, and he cannot remember in his past life that this kind of monster appeared in this dungeon. As per Stefan, this demon was the guardian of this place. Reifenhart then wondered if this monster hadn't even been taken care of yet. The monster suddenly roared so loud upon seeing them, and Reifenhart then told everyone that they must return for now since he believed it would be hard to take care of this monster with their current force. One knight suddenly screamed, telling Stefan to look at the sword the Growlbeast was wielding. It turned out that it was the demonic sword Alteon. Stefan unleashed his sword, but then Edward asked him if he really planned on fighting the Growlbeast. Stefan answered yes confidently, and Edward then said it was too dangerous, so they should go back to their family to prepare first since they had found out what they were up against. But then, Stefan doesn't want to return upon seeing the sword being dirtied by this monster. He didn't want to back down as he wanted to take back the sword no matter what, even if the sword is held by a Grim Reaper. He then screamed, commanding everyone to raise their sword. His men listened to what he said, while Reifenhart was annoyed seeing the foolishness of Stefan. Within the cracks of the dimension, in the ruins of the Silver Age, there's a system designed to automatically compensate for the system's weaknesses. However, due to a malfunctioning system, the supernatural monsters from here have been absorbed by the defense system. In other words, these beings called the guardians of the dungeon were living their lives freely before being kidnapped and forced into unpaid labor. Moreover, a monster that has fused with the system of the ruins becomes a much more formidable creature. And to think this demon killed Claude, who's rumored to be an aura user. If a demon ranking higher than Tagrel has become a guardian of the dungeon, then it must possess powers of a different dimension as per Reifenhardt. That monster's chained. Are you such a coward that you're scared of a chained-up opponent? Stefan angrily screamed at Edward. Do you really intend to fight that monster? No chance you'd win. You'll all die. Reifenhardt stated. I'm grateful for your help, but you're just a barbarian who knows nothing of honor. There are things in this world worth risking your life for, Edward stated. And for him, Reifenhardt is no match for this kind of thing in miles. He then screamed to the Altian Knights to stake their lives and show their bravery. They all charged at the monster, but Reifenhardt really believed that these men couldn't defeat the Grellbeast since they hadn't also managed to defeat Tagrel, the flaming monster. While the knights rushed at the Grellbeast, Sillin then blessed them with power. Knights started attacking the monster, but those who dared were mercilessly beaten up by the Grellbeast in an instant. Reifenhardt just sighed knowing that all of these people were so hard-headed. Another man flew away, which disappointed him. Still, they didn't surrender and continued fighting. At this moment, Reifenhardt is getting a rough idea of Stefan since Stefan won't listen to him no matter how he says he can't defeat the Grellbeast. At least, Edward seems relatively realistic, which made him think that Edward might understand his words than Stefan. And as for Stefan, he's actually been holding out against Grellbeast until this point. To put it nicely, he's flying like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. But in the eyes of Reifenhardt, this guy is just making petty scratches. On the other hand, Sillin continued to attack the Grellbeast with his magic power. The Grellbeast was affected a bit, so he continued what he was doing and asked his god Phalanx to unleash a holy mace generously. The Grellbeast was hit by the mace, and Letitia then jumped at the Grellbeast's head and attacked it with her sword. The Grellbeast's blood splattered, and Stefan acknowledged the Lady Elf for doing a good job. Reifenhardt saw Letitia's move and he agreed that Letitia is pretty skilled, better than Edward. In terms of ranking, he could say that Letitia would be number 2. Reifenhardt then concludes that he might underestimate this team too much. In front of him is Todd, enchanting a magic power, trying to cast a blizzard storm. He managed to activate the storm, but then, the azure light inside the dungeon suddenly turned into gold. A voice then uttered Heffen Ralter Philota, Ren 2 Bide Phase Talon. It means that the current defense system was overwhelmed and is now transitioning to Phase 2. The transition was in the process and the Grellbeast was roaring.
This was what Reifen feared. The increased power of the system was too much for the Knights of Altion. The Grellbeast was pumped up with so much juice that it was able to break free from being chained up. It used its speed and sheer force to trample over the injured knights mercilessly. With the rate that it was killing people left and right, the small army could be wiped out in just a few moments. But the young master doesn't seem to get it yet. He still thinks that his puny swordsmanship could take the life of a juiced-up Grellbeast. His pride and arrogance cost him another borderline fatal wound before landing an attack. The chivalry and honor that he kept on peddling were erased in the face of excruciating pain. Sir Edward saw his young master getting trashed and immediately went after his flying body. It looks like Stefan has been injured quite heavily, but he's safe. Lelsia the Slayer Elf immediately went to her master's side to protect him from any more attacks. Maybe with her skill and swordsmanship, she could stand a chance against the fearsome monstrosity. She could practically glide and jump in mid-air with full control of her body. No wonder Reifen acknowledges her skills. But it looks like fancy movement techniques are useless in the face of real indomitable strength as the creature battered her mid-air. She gritted her teeth in pain from the internal injuries that the Grellbeast dished out. And it wasn't done yet. Now that she's a vulnerable target, it's about time to finish the Slayer off with a flaming breath. The demonic creature released an attack that would surely burn down everything in its path. It wasn't just Lelsha who was affected. Every knight in the background also had to run for their life. But for most, that's easier said than done. Their numbers were dwindling, and the Grellbeast was still going on a rampage. The flames even burned through the area near Sillin, putting the priest in harm's way. Its blaze was almost upon him. His eyes lit up with the color of a relentless inferno. Just as he was about to get burnt to a crisp, the muscular frame of Mr. Reifen saved the pretty boy priest from certain death once again. He swiped away the unrelenting blaze like it was nothing at all. As the scattered scorching attack was redirected to the walls, Reifen even apologized for reacting so late. The floor has been cleared of any wandering knights. It's time for Reifen to take over the reins of this battle. With his current power, he was still skeptical whether he could solo something as powerful as this juiced-up Grellbeast. If he's being completely honest, he's been curious about just what the limits of his full power right now are. He wanted to know if the martial ability of his current body could handle that demon. Back when he was a mage, he would have never gambled when there was no chance of winning. But it's different now. He has become a warrior. He can now feel the thrill of going toe-to-toe with a strong opponent. a sensation that he could have never experienced in his past life. He has truly come a long way as a martial warrior. Master Gerard would be proud. That old man always told him that when in doubt, strike first. That's exactly why he opened up with 2 piercing key bullets. Grellbeast tried to counterattack out of frustration, but Riffin easily dodged with a lean back. His body could deflect a steel sword, but the demonic sword that this monster was wielding could leave a scratch. He also failed to take the unpredictability of this demon's movements. Riffin was caught off guard, and that gave the enemy the opportunity to land another attack. He managed to block the incoming attack with his arms, but the force behind it was way too strong, sending him away. Sillin watched the whole sequence, including the part where Riffin smashed against the wall, destroying it completely. But there's nothing to worry about. With Riffin's aura activated, this kind of roughing up wasn't too big of a problem. The pretty boy priest was speechless. This is his first time seeing an aura user in action. Riffin was just thinking about how if he stood his ground, he could have had the chance to counterattack. But after sparring with his master for years, parrying attacks has become a habit. That's just a sign that his techniques need a little more refinement. The Grellbeast roared at him using demonic language. Riffin doesn't understand, but he's willing to go for another round of combat. A demonic beast and a martial warrior exchanged blow after blow. Both were not willing to give space for one another. The young lord was finally seeing how true powerhouses collide. He couldn't even fathom how a country bumpkin was using aura. A lowborn with no honor and family was wielding aura. Something that a noble among nobles like Stefan hasn't manifested yet. And Riffin was using it so effortlessly. The bratty young lord was starting to feel his view of the world crumble. He couldn't take his eyes away from such a glorious display of technique and power. A monster that has nearly wiped out his army is roaring in pain from being pushed back by this mysterious man. The frightening question in Stefan's mind was who on earth was this guy, and where the hell did he come from? He refused to believe that this was an ordinary citizen. That Riffin guy is nothing short of a monster. Grellbeast tried to strike our hero with his sword in a rage, but he was able to dodge it without any problems. During the battle with the monster, Riffin could feel how incredible were the things he had learned about during this time. Right now, he could easily see all of Grellbeast's stupid attacks. In the very next instant, he had already dealt a crushing blow to the monster. His attack was far beyond what the knights present here could do, who couldn't even scratch this creature. However, it wasn't that simple with this monster. Guardians of the Ruins don't die even after being seriously wounded. The reason for this is quite simple. The ruins provide mana that helps heal their wounds. Simply put, inside the ruins, they were very strong, and if of high level, they were almost invincible. After a couple of moments, Grellbeast had already recovered and was ready to continue fighting with even more fury. He concentrated an incredible amount of energy in his mouth, and then he immediately attacked. But our hero was able to dodge this attack as well. Taking advantage of the fact that the monster still hadn't recovered from the attack, he grabbed its arm. This technique was called joint lock practice. It was followed by an air battle practice that went straight for the creature's jaw. But even that wasn't the end. Strike technique practice, that was really exciting. And Riffin was truly happy. For the first time in a long time, he could freely try out his powers without the risk of being killed to death by his teacher. However, even this opponent was still only a sandbag to him. At the same time, the other surviving knights were watching this epic battle with shock. It was unbelievable that a human was able to stand alone against such a terrifying monster. Our hero had no more time to play with Grellbeast, but if he wanted to end things quickly, he would have to use the Horn of Calamity to do so. The problem was that if he used it, the place would surely collapse and everyone here would be buried alive. The extra baggage was really annoying. As he continued to ponder what he was supposed to do, Todd called out to him. He suggested him to swing his sword. According to him, he could defeat the monster if a divine spell worked on the aura-covered sword. Riffin was well aware of this himself. He answered him that he didn't know how to cover his weapon with aura, but Todd didn't seem to hear his answer and asked him what he was talking about. Our hero irritatedly said that he only knew how to use the aura on his own body. Todd couldn't believe it. However, it wasn't the Riffin's fault. The problem was that this was his martial art. But suddenly, our hero was called out by Sillin. It seemed like he was up to something. He decided to check with Riffin to see if his body really had high strength. While continuing to fight Grellbeast at the same time, our hero replied that it was. His answer satisfied Sillin quite well. The very next moment, he began to cast some kind of spell. As soon as he finished, he directed it at Riffin, and as it turned out, it was really effective. Our hero almost immediately felt an unprecedented surge of strength. It felt like he was capable of literally anything. Grabbing the unsuspecting Grellbeast by the arms, he threw him over himself and slammed him against the wall with all his might. As soon as he came to his senses, he couldn't help but notice that the guy's divine spells were truly amazing. He was able to cast an enhancement spell that would normally be cast on a weapon, on another person's body. It was truly amazing. Seeing the success, Sillin smiled brightly and said that now they should beat that damn demon to death. Ryfin was a bit shocked at the contrast of someone so beautiful having such a crazy personality. However, there was no time to think about that at all. As long as the holy spell was in effect, he had to finish off the monster. In an instant, he was in front of Grellbeast and struck it using Divian Kick. This was followed by a Divine Knee. In short, Ryfin mercilessly continued to beat up the monster. But these were no longer the same punches as before. Enhanced by the divine spell, they carried a monstrous destructive power. At the end of it all was the Divine Punch. It was the final surprise that our hero had prepared for Grellbeast. A purple beam of light pierced through the monster. In an instant, the monster was torn in half. This was an unconditional victory. Such a heroic posture couldn't leave Sillin indifferent. The mana channels that were connected to Grellbeast began to disappear. It looked like it was over, and they had won. But Ryfin was still wanted to fight. His fighting spirit was stronger than ever. The wounded Stefan came up to him, and you could easily tell from his irritated face that he wasn't happy. He began to angrily ask what had amused our hero so much, and why he had been playing dumb and hiding his identity until now. He admitted that he was stronger, but he couldn't forgive that he had trampled his knightly honor. Stefan said that it must have been fun for him to stand by and watch them suffer. Ryfin replied that he had never mocked them. You could mock someone if you were interested in it. But our hero didn't understand how he could mock if he didn't care at all. Deciding to just ignore the guy, Ryfin turned around and started to walk away. Such behavior infuriated Stefan. He immediately rushed at our hero with his sword, furiously asking how he dared to turn his back on him. However, his sword did not reach its target because Ryfin suddenly bent down to pick up the demon sword, which was the goal of the mission. Stefan did not expect to miss at all. When he couldn't stay on his feet, he began to clumsily roll down the slope. He was so stupid that even afterwards he blamed our hero, asking him how he dared to dodge his blow. But despite his insolence, Ryfin did not respond in kind. Holding out the sword to Stefan, he again said that he had never thought of mocking him. Besides, wasn't this sword what all the fuss was about? Sir Edward was impressed by such a noble act on the part of our hero. The lack of greed in the presence of something so valuable, that was the real strength in his opinion. Stefan got what he wanted, but he wasn't happy about it. He realized that he had been humiliated, and he couldn't accept it. As for Ryfin and why he didn't take his sword, the real reason was that it was only a second-class weapon compared to what he had in his previous life. So the mission was accomplished, and they got what they wanted. Our hero offered to go back. Everyone eagerly supported this proposal, while the angry Stefan continued to hold his precious weapon, which could not make up for his trampled pride. The road back passed without incident, and they managed to make their way back to the village of cattle. Upon their return, Sillin healed several of the villagers. Watching him also hand out gold coins to the villagers, Ryfin noted that he knew how to do business. For such a small price, raising the villagers' trust in the Filanant's holy order was clearly a great idea. Since the mission was accomplished, Stefan's troop of knights didn't linger and soon left the village. On the way, Stefan told Sir Edward that they needed to investigate that young man named Ryfin. He readily agreed, adding that he too had noticed that he was very talented. After hearing this, Stefan's face became irritated. There was no way he was going to admit that he was weaker than that insolent guy. Ryfin didn't linger either and set off on his way. Thanks to going to the dungeon, he was able to try out his skills, as well as obtain gold and artifacts. Now it was also the right time to meet Ceres. However, he wasn't destined to travel alone. Our hero asked Sillin, who was following him, why he was following him. In response, he asked if Ryfin knew about the priests who traveled around the world, showed the grace of the goddess, and cared for the faithful. Our hero nodded affirmatively. He knew they were called pilgrims. They were also known for writing while traveling. Sillin said that he had originally planned to return to the Holy Order, but changed his mind and decided not to miss the opportunity to become a pilgrim. All because he had the opportunity to travel with the strongest man he had ever met. Our hero was frightened by the fact that he looked at him with the look he had seen in Todd's eyes. He felt as if he had been cursed, for there was no other way to explain the large number of perverts he had encountered. But even though Sillin was strange, he was not a bad person. At first, our hero thought of just politely refusing him. However, since he was a very capable cleric, he decided that he could use him as the best first aid kit. As the owner of such a strong body, he would hardly need help. But anything could happen to Ceres. Having made up his mind, he told Sillin to decide whether to follow him or not. On the way, Ryfin would not be bored, because Sillin asked him questions. He was very interested in how our hero was able to gain so much weight and what exercises he did for this. In the end, our hero even thought about whether he really did the right thing by taking him with him. While our heroes were on their way, the following events unfolded in one of the estates of the city they were traveling to. All around the manor were heard someone's angry scream. The owner of the manor was asking his subordinates why they had done so badly in the training. The man who was responsible began to apologize, saying he had done his best. However, Karen Trade Union's heir Beret didn't care about that. He believed that elves were supposed to be loving to their owners and offer them their bodies and minds. He said with irritation that he knew she was too cheap for a slayer. However, he didn't understand why such a cheap elven woman was so arrogant. The blonde-haired elven sitting on the bed replied that she was born like this. But Karen was not only annoyed by that, he couldn't stand her annoying stare. Then again, the elven girl couldn't help it either. She was born with those eyes. Still, the bastard didn't care at all. He immediately shouted to the butler to bring her back and buy a normal elven girl, not a low-grade product like this one. In the Chitan Principality's deep-rooted and traditional elf slave market, Elfenheim, the elven girl known as number 148 was returned for the third time. Chitan Principality was a commerce nation located at the northernmost point of the continent, near the towering cold mountains. It bordered several other nations. It was a place where trade flourished, thanks to the Duran River cutting across its perimeter. Cutting across the Chatan trade route, Reincarnates finally arrived at Zeppelin, the capital of this nation and the center of all commerce. It was a bustling commercial city teeming with prosperity. The place was just as Sillen expected from the best city on the continent for businesses. This nation had been established by merchants who bought land from the Graham Kingdom, after all. A nation where merchants lived like kings and people were driven by money. It was also the place where Cirrus currently resided. The pretty priest was really having trouble following Rafen's long strides. Off to the side, they happened to see something interesting. An old decrepit man was begging to be spared by a fat man with lavish clothes. This fatty was Rolafane Trade Union's head Tarek, and he did not take too kindly to people who insulted his organization. For that reason, he decided to beat the poor beggar as a so-called lesson. After venting his anger through 30 hits, he followed the beating by tossing 30 gold coins as tactless compensation. Sillen immediately ran to the old man's side to make sure that his bleeding head was all right. The pretty priest was disturbed and wanted to report the incident to the authorities, but the beggar stopped him. To this old man, being beaten up for 30 coins was worth it. This could help him set up his place in the city. Sillen found it ridiculous that a victim would just act like nothing happened if they were paid. Riefen wasn't surprised. People in this place were driven by money. The priest thought that he had seen it all with his travels. But this was new. In Zeppelin, the punishment for law-breaking was just a fine. There was no need to go to jail if you had cash. Now Sillen was getting worried about what business Riefen had in a depraved town like this. He wanted to answer honestly but stopped himself midway through. He finally realized how he would sound, but he had to confess that he came to this place to buy an elf. Sillen took it the wrong way and judged Riefen for being a certain type of depraved person, an allegation that Riefen strongly denied. But since he couldn't explain his previous life, he just had to accept the priest's judging looks. Sillen admonished him for being a man. Riefen reminded him that he was one too. To that, Sillen had no retort. Tarek's residence was situated in the priciest part of the merchant town. He was currently cursing other merchants for accusing his Rolafane Trade Union of ripping them off when they should be working harder instead. A beautiful elf was by his side to pacify and agree to anything. There were actually multiple slave elves servicing the disgusting fatty at the moment. That's when he spotted his old friend, Beret. The fat bastard asked the piece of crap what happened to the slayer he bought recently. Beret answered that he couldn't make the slayer listen, so she returned about 2 weeks ago. Tarek was quite amused that this guy couldn't even domesticate an elf slave. He thought it was emblematic of why Beret's Karen Trade Union couldn't get into the top 10. Beret tried to justify that there were a lot of people who returned the defective slave too, and that's why she was so cheap. The fat bastard was already thinking about what face this Beret would make if he managed to tame the untamable elf and decided to get to Elfenheim later. In the center of Zeppelin, the Riefen and Sillen duo decided to stay at a massive inn. When Riefen entered the room, he saw something extremely odd. Sillen was trying and struggling to work out. His skinny frame was in full display. If he tried this hard regularly, it didn't make sense that he still had no muscle mass. Riefen warned the priest not to push too hard if he didn't want to get muscle aches, but for Sillen, that wouldn't be a problem at all. After heavy workouts like today, Sillen liked taking the easy route of just healing himself back to full. From a sweaty mess, he went back to being a refreshed pretty boy in just a few seconds. Riefen finally understood why this kid worked so hard without even gaining any muscle. Healing magic was similar to a spell that turned back time. Muscles were supposed to be trained by stretching, destroying, and regenerating them. Using a heal spell would just take him back to the state before he began exerting himself. So, this foolish pretty priest had been wasting his time. Seeing the look on his face, Sillen asked if something was wrong. Ryfin just decided to teach him a more effective training method later. He also asked if the long hair became annoying when Sillin worked out. But even if the priest cut it, it just grew back really fast, and there was a belief that hair grew fast the more you thought of lewd thoughts. Anyway, Ryfin had enough money now after trading the treasures from before. It was about time to hit the slave auction, so Sillin also grabbed his garb to tag along. Various kinds of slaves were sold at this auction. The most popular ones were naturally the elves. They had a higher value than orcs, dwarves, or any other races because of their unparalleled beauty. That fact also inflated their prices, making them much more expensive than other slaves. A slayer went for around 800 gold coins. A female elf could fetch 300 gold coins, a young female elf for 100, and a young male elf for 30. A competent orc swordsman went for 10 gold coins, orc slaves were worth 5, and baby orcs fetched about the same. Male elves had no demand because of their sky-high suicide rate. Another reason for the popularity of elves was their long lifespans, but that also meant that they stayed in the adolescent stages much longer. There was a famous joke that a foolish merchant would die of old age investing in a baby elf. Even Sillin had heard of Elfenheim, an elf-specialized slave auction with 300 years of history. Ryfin didn't like this place at all. Naming a slave auction Elfenheim after the paradise of elves was sickening. Sillin had never been to a place like this, and he was glad to see that the elves were being treated better than orcs. But they were still slaves. Ryfin asked him if slaves could be happy. The innocent priest was confused by that inquiry since these creatures used to live in the wilderness. He thought that they should be happier under the care of humans where they wouldn't have to worry about starving to death or anything. Ryfin was quite used to this kind of response. This was what the average human thought of this inhumane situation. He knew that people's mindsets could not be changed by force. Doing that would only bring fear. That's why he intended to build a different kind of empire this time around. Different from the one that he had established in his past life. Ryfin could not construct a dark empire of a demon king. What they needed was a proper nation of the otherworldly species. The attendant apologized for making them wait and finally arrived to show them the goods. Beautiful elves stormed into the room with each of their unique charms. These were the prided slayers of Elfenheim. Sillin, being a man of God, quickly covered his eyes from sinning. The attendant thought that he was a modest young lady. Ryfin was appalled. For the forest fairies, descendants of the Great Spirit, to be in this position was unacceptable. He asked the attendant for a slayer with darker skin. Both the attendant and Sillin looked at him differently for having a so-called unique taste. The pretty priest even admonished him for going all through that slavery is bad lecture only to ask for a special request. The sleazy attendant confirmed that they had one slayer that fit the description, but he was hesitant to show her to Ryfin. In the end, they had to exit the main lobby and walk deeper into the facilities. There were elves outside in the sun practicing their mandated exercise. Elfenheim had their specialized method to make sure that they had top-quality merchandise. They even fed these girls fresh vegetables, fruits, and nuts. Elves raised on high-quality food emitted a pleasant smell. There were many cases of malnourished elves, but Elfenheim prided themselves on not having that issue. Hearing all that sick drivel just angered Ryfin. He asserted to just be taken to the elf. The attendant felt a crushing pressure for a moment, fearing the burly young man. They went to a gated part of the establishment to see number 148. In this room were the Slayer candidates who had yet to grow fully. This was a place where they honed their skills. The dark-skinned elf that Ryfin was looking for was just over there in the middle of the chaotic training ground. Laying eyes on the love of his life in such a state brought tears to the previous Demon King's eyes. Her grit and determination were still unwavering in battle. Even with tattered clothes, small wounds, and scratches all over her body, Ryfin was still smitten by her regal beauty. It was her. It was Cirrus. After a long journey to Zeppelin, he could finally reunite with his partner. Seeing her again brought Ryfin back to the memories of his past lives spent in their laboratory. The beautiful Ceres was always by his side to reel him in when he went a little crazy with his wild experiments. But even if he failed and destroyed the whole lab by mixing a fire plant with a seed rock, Ceres never got mad. She just apologized for going a little overboard, even though she made the same excuse the previous times. Ceres just couldn't stay annoyed at him for too long. She found him too cute, even in his old age. She would always be there to clean him up and help him stand again. With all the years they'd spent together, Ceres still insisted on calling him Sir Ryfenheart instead of addressing him casually. That was one thing that Ceres couldn't do. When asked why, she would just respond with a meaningful smile. Before they knew it, the kingdom they built was already on the brink of destruction. Ryfenheart looked at Antares burning to the ground with a somber expression. Ryfenheart's 4 heavenly kings kneeled before him, awaiting their instructions on how to deal with this situation. The orc chieftain Tathid broke the silence to give his final regards to his lord. Athilka, Macheline, and Cirrus stayed silent, however. Rifen teased that they looked like this was their first time seeing someone on the verge of death. The whole continent had gathered troops totaling 2 million to take down the Demon King, the nemesis of humanity. This was humanity in full force. Emperor Ravenheart Valdenteras couldn't help but wonder why humans were planning to ruin their countries just for one battle. They were so blinded that they could not accept the independence of other races. Tathid tried to plead for his lord to join them in escaping, but they could only get to safety if Rifen held the fort. He apologized to the god of dwarves, Alpoth, for still ending up in this position with a godly guarantee. But Macheline insisted that he shouldn't. The dwarven oracle foretold Rifenheart's arrival with an elf and orc by his side on the way to the abyss of Daiman. He was supposed to be the one to tear down the pillar of Hokril, the person who would bestow the dwarf's salvation. Riefenheart still couldn't believe that the dwarves had taken him as their savior back then. The old dwarf still believed that with Alpoth's blessing, all of them would reunite again. But for now, it was time to say farewell to each other. Once everyone finally took their leave to escape the incoming human army, Cirrus stayed behind. She insisted that she would be waiting for Sir Riefenheart. Rifen asserted that fate was something unknowable, so if something were to happen to him, he hoped that Cirrus could find someone nice. He tried to convince her that the situation was hopeless, but she strongly swore that she would be waiting for him no matter what. For a moment, the two exchanged meaningful glances. They had shared mutual love for all the years they'd been together, and there was nothing that could break that. Above the fire of the burning Antares Empire, the Demon King and the love of his life shared one final kiss before tragedy struck. Riefenheart snapped back into reality, with the attendant explaining that he felt bad showing this elf to customers because she was defective and uneducated. She might have the skills, but her personality was irredeemable. She was inferior to the other slayers. It was becoming so hard to sell her off that they were just using her to train other elves. In here, elves in training could get a taste of cutting into living flesh through Cirrus. Despite disclosing all those details, Rifen still wanted to go through the transaction. Seeing Rifen as a wealthy pervert, the attendant reckoned that he could get away with adding another 100 gold coins to the price tag. This brought the price up to 300 gold coins for a defective product. As far as Sillin was aware, that was an extremely good price. The attendant was still not sure if he should even sell something so trash. But Rifen went ahead with the purchase, and the first words out of the elf's mouth were a question asking him if he was her new owner. Upon inspection, he saw all the scars on her body and felt bad for everything she had gone through. The attendant offered to have a priest take care of the wounds, but that much could be left up to Sillin. It was cold outside, so they should get something for her to wear first. For now, she could just take his jacket. Since she didn't have a name yet, Rifen proposed that she should take the name Cirrus. When asked if she liked it, she just answered that she memorized the name now. From now on, her full name will be Ceres Balencia. But slaves had no need for surnames, so she asked if Balencia was her master's surname. It wasn't. This was a surname that she would hold on to from now on. He properly introduced himself as Riefenheart, and the pretty boy was Sillin, a priest of Filanence. Ceres remained wary, but she committed their names and faces to her memory. After they left, the attendant in Elfenheim was faced with a problem regarding number 148. The greedy Tarek could not believe what he was hearing. The slave he had taken an interest in had already been sold just an hour ago. His initial thought was that bastard Beret realized his plan and bought the slave back. But the attendant explained that the customer was a young man new to this town. He didn't even get a name since the guy paid in full cash, so probing wasn't necessary. Even with so many merchants, there was almost no one who would carry enough money to buy a slayer. But the price wasn't that high in the first place. Hearing this, Tariq inquired about what this guy looked like. The attendant truthfully described a young man with a burly build, someone who stood out. Currently, that young man was on a shopping run to get Cirrus out of her tattered slave clothing into something more practical. She looked quite cute with adventurer equipment on. Even Sillin was amazed by Cirrus's beauty. They could go with this outfit for now, they could always make an upgrade later. Rifen asked Cirrus if she was hungry, but she kept on responding like a slave willing to do her master's bidding. He tried to explain that she didn't have to think of him as a master, so she thought she was getting returned to the auction again. He stumbled on his words, afraid to say the wrong things. Cirrus couldn't quite understand what he was doing. She thought that this generous act and fancy clothes were just a front. This man was treating her as if she were a human girl or something. Rifen told her that it'd be good if they could treat each other as comrades traveling together. She could drop calling him master and just call him by name. Ceres grew cold. She thought that this was some type of role play, that Rifen was just a pervert who was playing the role of an adventurer, a foolish man who wanted to act as the hero who traveled with a beautiful swordsman. But she didn't voice these suspicions out and agreed to call him Sir Reifenhart. She had grown up with the idea that all humans were the same. Still, that did not stop her from hastily devouring some good food in front of her. People said that Redanti's Grace was the most famous restaurant in Zeppelin. By using the name of the goddess Redanti, the god of earth and bountiful harvests, the provider of food, one might say that the establishment was a form of worship. Seelin argued that if the restaurant was providing food as an act of worship, then the food should be free. That was rich coming from a Philinance priest making money using the beauty business. Pretty Boy Priest insisted that there was nothing wrong with what they did. Using beauty and love didn't go against their religion. Reifen brought up the fact that they charged quite a hefty sum of gold for the service, and Seelin couldn't cook up a response. After a moment of silence, Reifen turned towards Cirrus, who was hungrily devouring her meal. After a while, she finally noticed her master watching her eat without holding back. She was reminded that all humans were the same, and she shouldn't be too comfortable. But seeing her go back into her shell concerned Reifen that she might not like this place. He used to bring her here to commemorate their first meeting anniversary back then. He was well aware that he met Cirrus as a savior back then, and now he was meeting her as a buyer. It may be a meeting nonetheless, but the meaning behind it was different as day and night. He was starting to worry that he might have forced their meeting too soon. But Reifen was certain that she'd accept the things he would say to her sooner or later, so he was satisfied to just have her by his side. The next stop was the armory where the best weapons in the city could be bought. He was confused to see Cirrus pick up a rapier when she usually used a scimitar. That was a slip-up. He wasn't supposed to know that fact. Thankfully, Seelin butted in complimenting Reifen for being a martial master who could tell what weapon a person used just by looking at their hands. They left the armory with Cirrus equipped with a mithril-based weapon that she had always longed to carry. Seelin also ended up buying a knife when he had no use for it as a priest. As they were walking back to their accommodation, Reifen noticed some trouble brewing. A group of uniformed men were seemingly waiting for them to pass through a narrow alleyway. The man leading the charge opened his mouth with a polite proposal to talk about something. They hadn't exchanged any other words yet, but Reifen already knew that this situation might erupt at any second. Reifen asked the strangers what the matter was, showing little enthusiasm for the situation. The man in front stated that an individual of noble status had set his eyes on the female elf that Reifen had just bought. Ceres watched and listened without even batting an eye. Confirming his suspicion that this could turn ugly quickly, Reifen leaned toward the man and asked, "What now?" The man wanted Reifen to sell Ceres to them. The uniformed group promised that they would purchase her at a reasonable price. If Reifen would like, it would even be possible to trade her for a proper slayer indicated in a bill of exchange. Reifen quickly answered that he was not interested, while the man maintained a calm demeanor after hearing his refusal. He just reiterated that they would pay a reasonable price, a phrase that would make any other person in this money-driven city feel like they just hit the jackpot. Reifen was slowly running out of patience for this badgering when he had already said that he was not interested. The man and his uniformed group shot him sharp glances, insisting that he left them no choice. But they just walked the other way, not causing any trouble at all. At least not now. Back in Tarek's lavish residence. The greedy Tarek was yelling at the man named Romad for returning empty-handed when he wanted to get his hands on that elf. Romad explained that Reifen wasn't budging no matter the price, and with so many eyes watching them in the city, beating him up and tossing some coin after would not be a good idea. He would just look for the chance to abduct the slayer and fabricate a lie that she died and offer to pay twice her price. Romad thought that this was the cheapest way to get what the boss wanted. Tarek was quite pleased with the plan but wanted Sir Lantas to tag along. That old bat had just been sitting around and getting paid. It was about time to work. In the three-person party's accommodation, Reifen was looking at his remaining funds stored in the unlimited bag. He thought he would have 2,000 gold in surplus, but he had a lot more than that. Still, this was just a drop in the ocean since he was planning to rebuild an empire. Maybe he should start investing rather than lugging these heavy coins around everywhere. Come to think of it, the famine struck the Crovence Kingdom, a neighboring territory, around this time back in his previous life. The Crovence Kingdom was an agricultural country. Their fertile land and abundant harvests were blessed by goddess Redanti. They never considered preparing for a famine. However, when spring comes, a surge of starvation deaths and the hellish scenes of parents eating their own children will unfold. So it would be wise to invest in grains starting now. The trade unions that could make that happen are Rolifane, Karen, and Tauban. First of all, Rolifane is a hard pass. Their leader was a pervert who abused Ceres in the previous timeline. Between the other two trade unions, Reifen decided to go with the third largest one on the continent, which specialized in grains, the Tauban Trade Union. The leader of said union is Sivolt Tauban. He's currently in deep trouble as Rolifane was doing their best to bury them using unethical ways. At this rate, Taoban will lose its trade partners. While he was stressing over funds, one of his employees notified him that a possible investor had come. But a petty amount of investment won't solve their problems. It'll just increase their workload, so his first instinct was to send the investor away. Until his employee told him that the guy offered an influx of 1,500 gold coins. Riefin entered the office with a big smile while telling the union leader that he wanted 1,500 gold coins invested in grains. He wanted the money to flow into the Crovance kingdom around the time of barley harvest next spring. Sivolt Taoban immediately advised against such a move. Since selling grains to Crovance kingdom is like selling soap to the orcs, they won't buy it. But Riefin was already all in. If this doesn't work out, he'll take the loss while Taoban will still pocket the benefits if it turns out well. But Taoban can't possibly screw a customer making an investment bound to fail. If Sivolt won't do it, Riefin threatens to just go to a different union with his money. The honorable leader honestly confessed that his union was not in a great situation. With Riefin's investment, they could overcome the challenge and prosper. He wanted his clients to prosper too. This man was adamant in his previous life too. But this is Riefin's money, and he could do with it as he pleases. Now he needs that contract and fast. But before all that, there's one promise that Sivolt must abide by. That is to not spend his funds on personal use. He doesn't even need to say what would happen if that promise were broken. One more thing. There should be a Taoban trade union branch in Graham Kingdom since they recently paved a road in the northern region. Riefin wanted to know if they also have a branch near Delphia's Mage Tower. They don't, but they have a route running through it. He wanted the union to investigate someone from that tower. This is an opportunity to get information regarding the Riffin heart of this timeline. Meanwhile, Sillin and Cirrus were getting acquainted in the courtyard of the inn. The beautiful elf wanted to take this time to sharpen her skills with Sillin's tiny blade. Pretty Boy Priest watched in awe as Cirrus performed a series of moves flowing like water from one slash to the next. She truly looked like a dignified warrior whenever a blade was placed in her hands. Training her combat arts reminded her of her mother reminding her that as high elves, they are the original guardians of the forest. All elves lived in eternal happiness under the World Tree's protection in Elfenheim. They lived among animals, and the trees provided endless nourishment, though they are currently under siege by human forces. Her mother believes that Eldia will lead them back to paradise once again. They were supposed to be the descendants of the Great Fairy, yet their territory was burnt to the ground. Cirrus recalls her mother's voice telling her not to forget their pride. Those words echoed in her mind as the flames of destruction were reflected in her eyes. The next thing she knew, she was being sold away to a good place because of her pretty face. From now on, she must become loyal and polite as a good elf. But her first owner was a piece of garbage that beat up slaves every chance he got. Ceres wasn't even treated as a slave. She was like a prisoner, not even given food to sate her hunger. The other elves sneered at her. The fact that she was a pure-blooded high elf became something to be ridiculed by her fellow elves. What became her salvation was the sword. All the adults from her fallen kingdom wielded swords. They fought bravely and died with dignity. That's why she liked the sword. Through the swing of the blade, she could recall the proud figures of her parents fighting enemies. Time has passed, and her memories have become faint. But that one phrase from her mother has been etched in the corner of her heart. Our beloved daughter, you must not forget our pride. No matter what happens, those are words that she intends to live by. After finishing her sword routine, Cirrus heard excited claps coming from Sillin's direction. Pretty Boy Priest was thoroughly amazed by her cool performance. Fascinated by how she could move so fluidly, Ceres answered that the key is just doing your best. That doesn't help Sillin though. That's the same answer that Riefin would give. It's probably a martial artist thing. Anyway, Sillin was having fun with Ceres. He was quite a fan of strong fighters and their bodies after all. But the fun might have to be cut short when a familiar voice entered the courtyard. It was Romad and his men. He started by commanding Ceres to follow them. These people are up to no good. They have come all the way here under Tarek's order to get the female elf to her so-called true master. Ceres just looked at them nonchalantly. She did not falter one bit under Romad's ominous announcement. The group of multiple uniformed men slowly started pouring into the courtyard, taking their positions. Sillin clapped back and questioned these strangers as to who they were. Romad warned them not to expect rescue as they've already taken measures for that. Sillin was ignored even when he insisted that they wouldn't sell Ceres. One of the soldiers finally had enough of Sillin's yapping and drew his sword against the young priest. Ceres came in clutch and effectively parried the sword strike with the tiny dagger in her hand. The next thing you know, the aggressive soldier was already gurgling his own blood. His throat had been slit open. This angered the other soldiers, and they came rushing in as a group while Ceres calmly ran circles around them. When she finally got enough space and time to work with, the Slayer elf turned around and did what she did best. 2 1/ kills in the span of less than a second. This is the result of relentless training as a Slayer slave. Romad and his goons did not expect to meet this much resistance when the plan was supposed to be an easy abduction of a slave. But this woman was just too strong. She dropped multiple soldiers without breaking a sweat. Sillin was not going to get overshadowed either. He called on Philinance to strike these disrespectful intruders with an iron mace. He wasn't able to finish the casting process because of a throwing knife heading towards his head. Thankfully, Ceres got him out of harm's way on time. Romad personally threw the knife, asserting that no one would say anything if a young pilgrim was killed in this place. Now it has become too real for Sillin. It takes a special kind of bastard to interrupt a priest's incantation with the intent to kill, but Ceres assured him that everything would be fine. She started walking forward while playing with the dagger in her hand. She took a casual combat stance and insisted that this bunch of bastards would not be a problem. Romad felt infuriated being dismissed so casually by a slave, but his men felt fear. Still, this guy was quite a resourceful leader. Instead of sending his men to certain death, he just called another ace up his sleeve. It's time for Talcata to work. Now Talcata is very different from those foolish soldiers that died in a blink of an eye. Sillin and Ceres braced themselves as this wouldn't be a simple fight at all. They are about to face an orc warrior. All Talcata knows is that he must work and catch that elf in front of him. Orc vocal cords cannot produce complicated human language, but he wanted to apologize to Ceres, but this was her fate, so it's best to accept it. One look was enough to assess that Talcata's abilities are much better than those trashy humans. Ceres was starting to doubt if she even stood a chance. But Romad's next orders might become key to this battle. He instructed Talcata to not leave any marks on the slave elf, and all Talcata does is follow orders. The first collision of the elf and orc warriors almost ended in a tragedy for Ceres. She tried to block the first strike, but upon realizing that the sword would pierce through her body, it suddenly curved to the side at the last second. The blade did not graze her, but the impact and air compression that it produced pushed her away. This was just the start of Talcata's exhibition of strength and technique, yet Ceres had almost died already. There's no doubt in her mind that this orc warrior was a strong veteran fighter. Now she was regretting leaving her mithril scimitar in her room. The dagger's blade was just too short and small to retaliate against a monstrous opponent. Ceres tried to land a cheeky slash but ended up getting parried into the air by Talcata's broadsword. Romad was getting frustrated watching the orc warrior on the sidelines like a coward. He kept on insulting their representative for taking too long to grab a little elf. Hearing that despicable man, he has to call Master Scream with his grating voice just means that Talcata is going to starve again tonight. But the job's still not done. The orc warrior has pushed the pace faster once again, forcing Ceres to do nothing but dodge and block. Talcata was indifferent. He was just doing this for the sake of having something to eat. Ceres wasn't giving in. She would fight like a warrior to the end. The orc warrior finally took some massive steps to close the gap while the broadsword was primed for a devastating attack. Instead of blocking or dodging, the Slayer actually chose to run even closer to the enemy. Talcata was surprised and faltered for a moment. This elf was insane. He brought his broadsword down in a forceful slash, but Ceres expertly deflected the blade's weight above her using a tiny dagger. When she got close to her kill range, Ceres did not blink. She was not fazed at all. It was as if she was moving with supreme confidence without fear. Talcata noticed that the elf girl had thrown the idea of dodging and defending away. Ceres was just coming in to remove the range disadvantage while knocking Talcata out of his game. This was the first time that she smiled a genuine smile after such a long time of being empty. That small dagger that Sillin bought on a whim started breaking through the tough skin. With a full-powered swing, she managed to nick Talcata's neck, causing it to spurt out blood. The orc's shoulder pads were also destroyed by the attack's force. Talcata almost messed up the mission and killed the target. If he hadn't changed direction, Ceres would have gone. But the Slayer has already taken everything into account. She did what she did, believing in Talcata's abilities. Sillin yelled at Ceres to block some flying daggers for a moment. Her limit would probably be just one block, though. For someone as talented as Sillin, that should be enough to get a spell off on time. Plus, he believes in Ceres. Romad saw the holy light and knew what was up, so he took out another throwing dagger while cursing at the priest. He threw the dagger with the flair and anger of an entitled brat. That's when Ceres came in running with her impressive speed and remarkable reaction time, watching the trajectory of the flying dagger. This pathetic attack could not even compare to Talcata's swings, so it was easily deflected. A clutch block like that was enough for Sillin to conjure 3 apparitions of holy Philinance. He beckoned these apparitions to beat up the damned bastards enthusiastically. Ceres was shocked to see this pretty boy actually performing something impressive with his holy magic. Romad, on the other hand, feared for his life. The apparitions of holy Philinance situated on top of ornate scepters came flying to where the soldiers positioned themselves. It essentially destroyed the inn's courtyard, causing an impact that was felt throughout the area. Sillin immediately started running since his divine power only works on demons and the undead. That big show of destruction can only buy them some time to run away. Ceres had no time for this guy's pathetic running speed, so she picked him up from the scruff of his priest garb. The Slayers also took the Orc warrior's broadsword, tossing it into the air and kicking it forward. Its sharp blade lodged itself into a nearby wall where a window was situated nearby. Ceres followed the trajectory of the broadsword and jumped on its surface to use as footing. Utilizing the increased momentum from the steel's bending, she was able to propel herself and Sillin up into the higher floors of the inn. Once they reached the highest point, the Slayer protected the pretty boy priest from the shards as she broke into a window. Romad was mad now that he and his unit had been beaten up by godly apparitions. He urgently ordered Talcata to give chase. But before the Orc warrior could take another step, a composed voice berated Romad and his men for failing. The gentleman couldn't believe that all this fuss was because of an escaped female elf. An old man with a scruffy beard was fascinated that a Slayer elf could fight with a veteran Orc warrior and sneak out. He thinks that maybe it's about time to earn his keep too and asks where the elf went. Romad pointed up to the broken window and a surge of pure energy surrounded the old man. He casually lifted off the ground without a running start and while wearing heavy equipment. This mysterious old man smoothly entered through the broken glass in pursuit of Sillin and Ceres. Even the arrogant Romad was humbled at the sight of that old man and those inhuman capabilities. This is Sir Lantas, an aura user under Tarek's employment, and this is how he rolls. For once he was given a task that he might actually enjoy. He misses this feeling, the thrill of playing life or death hide and seek. Sillin and Ceres don't know what's about to hit them. The distance to the door in the corridor seemed endless. Sillin suggested to Ceres that he should go back to the room and take their equipment. He supposed there might be people there. However, they can take on 1 or 2 people. It's still better than running off with a single dagger. Ceres agreed with the plan. She was surprised that someone she thought was a naive child would be so focused in such a dangerous situation. The guy guarding the door heard the noise and turned his head in bewilderment to look. The first and probably the last thing he saw was Ceres preparing to strike. One punch from her was enough to knock the poor guy out. While Ceres was getting dressed, Sillin was panicking and pushing her along. He said they should grab their things and run away as soon as possible. He then started reciting some sort of protection spell that would help them hide. At the same time, Sir Lantas was already walking down the corridor of the inn, getting closer and closer to the room where our heroes were hidden. He was a swordsman who had reached a great level of skill with the sword. He was so skillful that he even managed to awaken his aura. An aura user can sense the movements of all living things within a radius of 30 meters, as if seeing them with their own eyes. That was why he was surprised to see that his opponents had just decided to hide in the room. However, after breaking down the door and finding no one, he realized his mistake. He had never thought that some kid would be able to use the concealment skill as a high-level cleric. It was obvious that they had already escaped. Suddenly, one of his subordinates came running to him and asked if they had managed to escape. They had, but Lantas was not going to give up so easily. He knew they couldn't have gotten far, so he immediately ordered to release the hounds to search for them. At about the same time, Ceres and Sillin tried to escape through the alleys of the city. Following Sillin, who had temporarily taken command, Ceres asked if it would be better for them to go out into the street and get lost in the crowd. But he immediately rejected this idea, for if people realized that they were runaway slaves, they would surely turn against them. As a saint of the Holy Order, Sillin was protected. However, now, as a lone pilgrim, he realized how hard it was for those. However, giving up and returning to the Holy Order was obviously not a good option for him, for there was something more terrible waiting for him there. He told Ceres that if Rifin were here, everything would have been resolved long ago. Hearing this, she asked incredulously if he was really that strong. Without answering, Sillin began to recite the spell. There was only one thing to do now, and that was to try to find him. A pink light illuminated the street. It was the spell that would lead them to Reifenhart. It was called the Crossroad of Destiny, and with the help of the strings of fate could point the way to their goal. Love turns coincidence into destiny, and a chance encounter turns fateful through love. It may just be a coincidence with a probability close to inevitability, but when it's blessed by filaments, it becomes destiny. This sacred spell was originally used to create couples that would be compatible with each other. It was clearly not intended for such use. However, there was no other way out. Turning to Ceres, Sillin noted that she was very powerful. Before her, he had only seen one slayer named Lelsia, but she was not as strong as she was. Ceres also noted that he was already at the level of a high-level cleric, despite his young age. After exchanging praises, Sillin was left surprised. While talking to Ceres, he didn't feel like he was talking to a slave at all. While he was thinking about it, they had already reached the right place. It was to these ruins that the threads of fate were pointing. However, in the next moment our heroes realized that something was wrong. Out of the ruins slowly emerged a completely different person from the one they were looking for. It was Lantas. How could this happen? That was the question on Silen's mind. Cirrus immediately prepared for battle. A smile appeared on Sir Lannis's face. He was grateful to these kids for giving him a good workout. He assumed that they were planning to try to escape again, so he advised them not to make that mistake again. Ceres also realized that if they tried to run away, they would leave their backs open. Already in the next instant, she had thrown herself at Lantas with a fierce scream. They had only one way to go: defeat the enemy. In the blink of an eye, she got close to him and swung her sword. Lantis was an aura user, and Cirrus was clearly no match for him. Once behind her back, he noted that she was clearly not a novice slayer and that she was quite talented. Ceres desperately swung her sword behind her back, but it was useless. Sir Lantis was already in front of her. He also noted that she was trying very hard, which was unusual for a slave. Ceres was not interested in what he was saying. All she could think about was what kind of man was in front of her. As Silen read the spell, he himself was pondering why a man of such skill was involved in this mess. With his abilities, he had to be at least a famous knight or swordsman. As he cast the spell, Cirrus's sword began to illuminate with a bright light. The girl was surprised at the power she received. Needless to say, even Lantas was surprised. After all, to cast so many high-level holy spells at the same time, one had to be of episcop level. It was hard to believe that the boy in front of him was one. Silen proudly replied that he was quite famous in the south, then excitedly shouted to Cirrus to beat up that rascal. The next moment, a hail of blows fell on Lantas. However, he was well aware that these attacks were not the same as before. With the amplification of the saint, the elf had changed beyond recognition, but it was still not enough to defeat a person with an aura. Her sword as well as her hope of victory were completely destroyed. Sir Lantis counterattacked back, and his strike successfully reached its target. Blood spurted out. He said in a cold voice that they only underestimated him because he played along. Silen was shocked and couldn't believe his eyes. In front of them was a person possessing an aura. However, despite that, Lantis couldn't help but admit that he had to use the aura on the lowly slayer. Sitting beside the injured Ceres, Silen wondered in despair what an aura user was doing in such a place. People of this level could live in luxury anywhere. Using it just to catch an elf slave was tantamount to getting a dragon to fire up the furnaces. While he was pondering this, reinforcements arrived to join Lantas. Silen was very surprised when he heard the name. He had heard of this man before. His full name was Lantis von Kalpenard. He was a famous knight of the Taken Kingdom. Being a descendant from a noble family, he displayed astonishing battle prowess after awakening his aura as early as 30 years old. The entire kingdom rejoiced at the birth of a new aura user. However, Lantis had one terrible secret that he couldn't share with others. He had an unspeakably terrible personal entertainment. It started with the elf slaves, before moving on to the humans of the city of Royal. Eventually, it even crossed over to the nobility. Thus, he became the greatest disgrace in the history of the Taken Kingdom. Upon recognizing what kind of person was in front of him, Silen came to be horrified. Seeing his reaction, Sir Lantis said that he must have known a lot about him. That was true, for Silen had often been told that if he wandered at night, Lantis would come after him. The childhood injuries were still making themselves felt. Silen also began to say that he was actually justifying the rumors. After all, what self-respecting aura user would take on such dastardly deeds? Hearing this, Lantis replied with a smile that he was someone who was just trying to live off his salary. He confessed to killing hundreds in the Taken Kingdom, and after that, he fled here. And it's been a long time since he last played tag. Romad noted that to the Rolifine trade unions, Sir Lantis's disgrace was of very little importance. They could give him the dirty work, and he would get money and freedom. It was a profitable partnership for both of them. In addition, it was his strength that made this trading company the second largest in just 10 years. Lantis was determined to seal Silen's divine power. Shooting several aura bullets at him, he said that he knew very well that the best solution was to silence the high-level cleric, because it could turn out badly for him in the future. Romad worriedly told Sir Lantis to try not to hurt the elf anymore, but he replied that they could always heal her. Then turning his gaze to Silen, Lantis noted that he was quite handsome. He didn't know anything at all, so he offered to take her with him. Silen immediately cried out in panic that he was a man and would not go anywhere with them. As it turned out, however, that wasn't a problem for Lantis. He always wanted some kind of new experience. Romad reached out to grab the frightened Silen. However, all he ended up with was a wound on his arm. Interest appeared on Lantis's face. He couldn't understand how the boy could stand on his feet with his tendons cut. In his opinion, he was the brightest, most beautiful, and fragile zombie in the world. He also said that although he didn't want to do it, it looked like he'd have to amputate his limbs. There was a look of horror on Silen's face. The next moment, one of the walls was instantly destroyed by an explosion, which caught the attention of everyone present. Silen opened his eyes wide in surprise. He had already guessed who it was. Riefin appeared from the cloud of smoke and said in a cold voice that he had finally found those bastards. His anger and rage was hard to describe in words. They dared to touch his Cirrus, and so they had to pay for it. Riefin's sudden appearance made everyone freeze in place. Under their surprised looks, he threw off his jacket and walked straight past Sir Lantis, who could only wonder who was so cocky to show up. One glance of the experienced warrior was enough to realize that this young man was not just an ordinary well-built kid. Sir Lantis could even sense his very strong aura, and kept wondering who he was. Romad had already met him, so he told him that he was the one who bought the Slayer elf. However, Riefin's appearance did not fit the description of the buyer, who, according to Romad, was just a random kid. Now Sir Lantis felt all his feelings going off the charts just by looking at him. And he called him a random kid? There was no doubt about it. He was an aura user too. But looking at him, he couldn't understand how. How was he able to master aura at such a young age? Sir Lantis finally came to the conclusion that the guy was only young in appearance, and in reality, he must be in his 40s. It's been a while since he met someone as strong as Riefin. Our hero only grinned as he prepared for the fight, and advised his opponent not to pretend to be a knight, when in fact he is just a dirty pervert old geezer. Sir Lantis did not have to wait long for a reaction, and in the next moment he rushed to attack. Our hero was also ready, and his fists were already blazing with aura. Each of them rushed forward with their weapons. Our hero only had his fists, while Sir Lantis was already taking out his sword. Their attacks met, and everything around them lit up with a flash from the collision of two powerful auras. The explosion was so strong that the bricks of the stone wall flew apart like small pebbles. In this chaos, Riefin's figure towered over the old knight. But despite our hero's powerful blows, the knight wasn't simple, and deflected each of his blows, while striking back. They seemed to be evenly matched. It was a legendary battle between two worthy rivals. The others, however, had to be careful. Romad understood this well and shouted to his warriors to run away, otherwise they would all die, being swept away by some random blow of these two titans. While Silen was treating Cirrus, Riefin continued to destroy the fortress walls in the heat of battle with his opponent. Ceres was surprised that Mr. Riefenhart is an aura user. It was just that Silen had neglected to tell her about such a minor detail. Ceres, on the other hand, was seeing something like this for the first time and watched her new master's movements as if mesmerized. Meanwhile, Sir Lantis couldn't understand what was going on. This guy's skill level was clearly not that of someone who had recently awakened his aura. His movements were too confident, and his gaze was like an old man who had learned the meaning of life. On top of that, he controlled his aura as skillfully as he controlled his fists, even deflecting with aura bullets some of his attacks. Sir Lantis realized that he was simply too proficient with aura. There were only two possibilities. He had either awakened his aura in his teens, or he was actually over 40 years old and still had his baby face. Anyway, both cases were too unlikely and seemed completely pointless. The battle continued, and neither of them were going to back down. Our hero was beginning to wonder why this damn knight was so strong. How could some filthy pervert who tried to put a hand on Cirrus use swordsmanship as precise as this? But it didn't really matter, because he was going to beat up anyone who said martial arts were only good for building character. All of Lantis's attacks had been deflected, and he didn't understand how that was possible. This guy was able to repel all of his sword attacks with his bare hands. He really has incredible skills. Who could he be? There was only one obvious option. So Lantis asked if he was a disciple of the martial king Gerard. Riefin wasn't even going to answer this so-called knight, but he still wondered why he was so caught up over some slave when he's this strong. Riefin couldn't stand such disrespect to his beloved. How dare this old pervert call her a slave? He was already furious at the way people treated the other races. They don't even want to admit that those slaves have their emotions and will. Lantis even froze in surprise. It was the first time he had heard such nonsense, and probably for the last time, because our hero was about to teach him a lesson. How could Lantis call them slaves when he had never even spoken to them properly? Had he ever once in his life wondered why they were considered slaves? Literally one blow from Riefin, and the wall crumbled. Lantis wasn't going to give up so easily and successfully dodge the blow. He still couldn't understand what kind of nonsense he was spouting again and again. This reaction was nothing new to our hero. He had seen it many times before in his past life. It's just that they believe that all beings other than humans are inferior. And this belief is so deep-rooted throughout all of humanity that they simply cannot even admit that they are wrong. They see that these otherworldly species laugh and cry, yet they don't think that they have emotions. And anyway, how are humans better than elves that they treat them as slaves? Surprisingly, Lantis had something to say to all these accusations. He thought that it's only natural that humans take otherworldly species as slaves as the lords of creation. That is what his godsayer said. What could they be if not slaves? Ryfin didn't understand why the heirs of the great fairies would be born to be slaves. Had he never considered that if humans didn't dominate the world, they could be slaves? When humans took orcs as slaves, humanity celebrated in joy. It was the same with the dwarves and the elves. All because it's human nature to use the weak for our own self-interest and greed. Our hero could not accept that. He was sure that if someone permit others to become slaves, then he's permitting himself to become one too. Lantis was shocked. It seemed to him that this guy was really mad. How could he really think that elves are equal to humans? But mad or not, Ryfin's strength was unbridled and Lantis barely had time to dodge. The wounds that covered Ryfin's entire body were mere scratches to him, and he was determined to prove to this old pervert that Cirrus was no slave. And his determination was as strong as his blows. He wanted to change everything. After all, the slave system that had taken root on the continent was not only bad for the other races, but also for the weak and poor people who were forced to live a life of half-slavery. That is, serfdom is. The implementation of a wrong ideology always comes back to bite you in the back, but the foolish humans are not yet aware. Nor did Lantis yet realize his defeat. In the next instant, his defenses were already broken, and he received a mighty kick from our hero, soundly kissing the wall. That's when he realized that this was his end. As Ryfin continued to talk about his philosophy of life, he believed that if this vicious chain of slavery is not broken, if the beliefs of mankind remain unchanged, one day absolutely everyone will live in fear of these chains. That must be changed. Lantis realized that Ryfin would not spare him, and he would only be the first link in the chain he was going to break. Ryfin was convinced that he had to change it. Change it, no matter what it would cost. The next blow Lantis couldn't dodge. It was the end. The blow was so strong that it just crushed him into the wall. And then it blew him with the wall. His flight was short and soon ended with him hitting another wall. Ryfin was ready to change all that no matter what, so that no one would ever dare or even be able to call Cirrus a slave again. So that no one could even think of anyone else as a slave. Our hero was ready to change the whole world for her. Cirrus herself was quite surprised by such loud speeches and only wondered if he was insane. But even if he seemed insane to her, his words touched her to the core of her being and brought back memories of her childhood. She was reminded of her mother's words, who had said that they were the descendants of the great fairy. Surprisingly, even after such powerful blows, Lantis was still alive, and moaned among the ruins, begging to be saved and spared. Ryfin found the idea highly dubious, so he asked why he should save a perverted bastard like him. Lantis was ready to say anything in the face of death, and swore with his sword that he would put away all his sins for the rest of his life and use his life to do good. Our hero noticed that the expression on the bastard's face didn't look at all as if he was telling the truth. On top of that, he really hated the Sayer Holy Order, because participants of this order can commit all sorts of evil things as long as they confess at the temple. If he really wanted to repent, he should convert and never come to the Sayer Temple again. Lantis cried out in desperation that he would do as he said, and our hero didn't need to get his hands dirty in blood at all because of a bastard like him. But that was a poor argument. Dirty blood already stained his hands, especially in his past life. Lantis didn't even think about what he was saying and agreed with everything and believed his word. Ryfin was definitely not going to spare the bastard anymore and said that since he had actually repented, he probably thought he deserved to die. And surely he still thinks he should die quickly to pay for his sins that he had already put aside? Ceres and Scylla had already realized what was about to happen and froze in horror. With one final blow, Ryfin ended this perverted knight's life forever. All he could say was that he shouldn't have used the word repent so haphazardly. That's not something a bastard like him should be saying. Still, the aftermath of their battle was impressive, and our hero wondered if all his companions were safe and sound. By this time, Scylla had already finished the treatment, and Ryfin just couldn't help but say that he is one of the best first aid kits. Luckily for him, Scylla didn't realize what he meant. Suddenly Cirrus spoke and asked our hero if he was okay. Such an emotional blow was stronger than from Lantis. Ryfin was shocked that Cirrus was the first to speak to him, even though her voice was colder than ever. To her, on the other hand, he was a really weird guy. Romad and a few other soldiers tried to use this moment to quietly slip away, but they failed because Scylla noticed them. Ryfin threateningly asked them if they were going to escape. Well, they could try, but then he would definitely let them experience something new. Romad was scared to death and froze in place. A new experience was definitely not in his plans, and he was ready to answer all the questions of Ryfin, who asked who gave him those orders. Of course our hero was sure they wouldn't crack so easily, and that was expected. But he had one proven tool, called a training club, which he was ready to use with all possible mercy. The poor guys were scared when they saw the club in his hands and couldn't understand what it had to do with mercy. It soon became clear when, under the moonlight, the three bad guys were beaten properly, and Riffin asked them again what bastard had organized all of this. The poor guys had actually been ready to tell everything before they were beaten, but now they were just rushing to tell what they knew. It was Tariq, the union leader of the Rolifane Trade Union. They even revealed that he lived on the southern outskirts of Zeppelin and explained how to get there. Tariq, that fat bastard, was well known to our hero, for it was he who had abused Cirrus for 10 years in his last life. In the past, Riefin wanted to kill the bastard right after he saved Cirrus, but unfortunately when he found him, he was already dead in his bed. Now Romad, seeing the look on our hero's face, realized what he was going to do and said that even he wouldn't be able to get to him. Tariq owns the second largest trade union in the Chatan Principality, and if Riefin dares to do anything to him, he will definitely become an enemy of Chatan. Our hero was aware of that himself, but that didn't stop him at all. He just knew too well what kind of bastard Tariq was. As promised, Riffin let them live and advised them to stay together so they wouldn't freeze to death. Romad's friends liked that idea much better than he did, especially his warm chest, and even his cries not to touch him didn't help. It was too cold outside, and it seemed that nothing could save him from a very dubious experience. Meanwhile, back at the Tariq mansion, Karen was wondering when they would get that elf girl back. Tariq was curious about that too. Normally Ramad didn't linger like this and accomplished things quickly. With them in the room were also two frightened elven girls who had been bought specifically as payment for Sir Lantas. Soon they heard a strange loud sound in the hallway, but Tariq didn't pay much attention to it, as he thought it was just all sorts of peasants and servants rebelling and making noise. But he was wrong, as the last of his soldiers were falling one by one in the corridor, and they were not defeated with weapons at all. Common slaps from our hero were enough to defeat them all. Even though he was holding back, it was getting harder and harder not to kill them. And Sillin was constantly having to heal knocked-out guards. But the healing didn't end there. Sillin also cast a spell that blurred their hurtful memories. Thus, thanks to his abilities, they left no witnesses behind them. Of course, our hero could have walked in here himself and come back with that bastard's head. But his friends also wanted to see that bastard get beaten to death. And in that case, the memory removal skill was very useful. Suddenly, another obstacle appeared right in front of them. Talcata, who was determined to do his duty and block the intruders. Riefin wanted to resolve things peacefully, insisting that Talcata had the blood of a warrior in him, and the one he was protecting was not worthy of his protection. So why then wield a sword for him? But Talcata stood his ground. He is a warrior, and he has a duty as one who wields a sword. If he was to get swept away and bend his will, how could he be called a warrior? Riefin reminded him that he lives as a slave, and the man he served was not his mentor. Talcata still remained steadfast. Even if that man was not worthy, such is the duty of a warrior to fulfill the task you have been given, even if that is forced. It was expected of the orc. He was too straightforward and stubborn. Sillin, on the other hand, was surprised in another way. How could Riefin speak orc? Suddenly Cirrus stepped in and said she would take care of the orc and let Riefenhart move on. This time she had a different, more suitable weapon in her hands, and now they could fight on equal terms. Takata took one look to realize that this weak elf had become stronger. Our hero trusted Ceres completely and moved on. But lastly, he asked Seelan to watch her and watch her back. It was absolutely no problem for him. That was his expertise. Talcata, seeing Riefin walk past him, asked the strong man why he was ignoring him. Had he decided to head towards Tariq right now? Our hero answered him that now his opponent is the elf girl in front of him, and the fact that he is paying attention to him now is disrespectful to his opponent. Talcata couldn't argue with such a statement, and our hero only once again remarked that orcs are like this. Soon Riefin reached a door through which purple smoke was pouring. It was unmistakably the nasty smell of pink smoke, and as he peered through the door, his eyes widened with horror. The whole room was drowned in that smoke, and the blood spatter on the wall completed the picture. In the middle of the room stood two perverted bastards we already know, who, under the influence of the pink smoke, didn't even realize who had dared to break into their room and interrupt their fun. When they frantically called for security, expectantly no one answered them. At the door stood only a very angry Riefenhart, who had seen all sorts of dirty acts in his life and had never seen anything like this. And this was something he certainly couldn't forgive them for. Those bastards had to pay for their deeds. Tariq was furious at the sight of the strange intruder, who also saw what they were doing and began to ask who he was and what he was doing here. His gaze immediately fell on the two dead elven women lying on the floor. Saying that Riefin was furious was a very mild way of putting it. He didn't understand why there were so many people in this world that he shouldn't have let live. Tariq started calling desperately for Talcata. He didn't understand what was happening or where his guards had gone. Since no one showed up to his cries, he decided to try to negotiate. He started to ask what he wanted, if he needed money. Seeing no interest on the guy's face, he realized that he had probably come for the work of the Taobon trade union. He started to panic, promising to pay him twice as much as his employer, but it wasn't about the money. No. It pained Rifin to realize that Sirius in his past life had been a slave to this trash for 10 years. He hadn't changed a bit. Trash doesn't change. Seeing that the guy's mood had worsened even more, Tarek panicked and started to say that he would immediately write up a contract. However, his words were little more than mere sound. Our hero didn't need anything he was offering. All he wanted now was his death. Even after the blow, Tariq still didn't understand what was going on and why he was being beaten. However, in the next moment, our hero explained that it was all because he dared to touch his Ceres. A look of bewilderment appeared on the fatty's face. He didn't even understand who he was talking about, but he was never meant to find out. Rifin had done to him what he had done to his slaves. To summarize Tarek's impressions, he didn't like it. To say the least, even Karen didn't like it, or he just realized he was next in line. Tarek was dead. Before he died, Rifin had managed to make him feel the full range of sensations Cirrus had once felt. That should have been enough. Karen, horrified by what he had seen, began to accuse our hero of being a murderer. Rifin was amused to hear the words of a man who also killed, and for fun. However, as it turned out, he did not think so. In his opinion, he lived his life without guilt. To what our hero replied that such trash like him really had no conscience. At the same time, Cirrus and Scylla came into the room. It was not a pretty sight, dead bodies and pools of blood. Even in Cirrus' opinion, it was quite brutal. However, Rafin didn't think it was wrong. In his opinion, those bastards deserved much worse. Scylla also agreed with him. They were real trash. Ceres was surprised that Scylla didn't even flinch at the sight of so many corpses. The one explained that he had just spent a long time traveling. He also informed our hero that Cirrus had taken care of Talcata and that he hadn't even helped her. However, that wasn't entirely true, for she wouldn't be standing here if he hadn't healed her. Scylla's words were true. Luckily, Talcata was not dead. He was wounded and his breathing was weak, but he was still alive. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by the last of the bastards, Karen. Seeing Cirrus, he immediately remembered that she was the slayer he had brought back. Looking at the dead elves, Cirrus asked in a cold voice if he was the one who killed them. The one asked in desperation what she would do if he was. Ceres had an answer to that question. His death was clearly not enough to make up for the death of the child as well as everyone else he had killed. However, it was the least she could do right now. It was really hard to keep alive a trash who didn't understand why she was going to kill him over some slave. The very next moment, Karen's heartbreaking scream was heard. In death agony, he reached for the dead elf looking for salvation, but his attempts were futile. In the next instant, the blade pierced his heart, ending his life forever. Ceres was not going to let such a bastard touch her with his filthy hands. Rifin watched all of this in silence. He was sorry that she had to go through something like this again. He promised himself that he would be stronger and do everything he could to make sure it didn't happen again. It was deep night over the snow-covered winter forest. A fire was burning on a clearing in the middle of the forest, and many elves and orcs who had been slaves of Tarek and Karen were gathered around it. Talcata reported to Ceres that he had gathered all the slaves that were in that place. In response to her thanks, he replied that he didn't need to be thanked. He bowed his sword, for from now on her master was his master. Observing the present, Scylla noted that the gender ratio was rather odd. But for Ceres, there was nothing unusual about it, for male elves and orc women were not popular at all. Watching what Rifin did and said, Ceres began to doubt the validity of her thoughts about him. Though his words were loud and seemingly impossible, she felt in her heart that he spoke from the heart. However, her thoughts were disturbed by Rifin returning back to their small camp. Unfolding the scroll he had brought, he explained that it was a slave contract that bore the seal of the leader of the Rolifans Union. It was quite difficult to find, as it was a very important document. When Scylla asked him where he had gotten it, Rifin proudly replied that he had stumbled upon the safe when he had broken down one of the office walls. Scylla didn't share his emotions, and remarked that it was barbaric, just his style. Our hero immediately excused himself, saying that in all his 50 years of life, no one had ever said anything like that to him. But the next thing he knew, he realized his mistake. He was still not used to the fact that he was in a completely different body, and he also had a feeling that he was gradually turning into a barbarian. The answer to the question of why he needed a slave contraption was quite simple. Addressing everyone present, Rifin said that anyone who no longer wanted to live the life of a slave, he would grant them freedom. Freedom? It was an almost unfamiliar word to the elves and orcs. They knew its meaning, but they could not imagine what it meant to them. It was sad to learn that they did not even understand what he was offering them. Scylla asked Rifin if he intended to engage in the slave trade, but the answer was obvious to our hero. He had no intention of selling them to anyone. Then Scylla asked Rifin if he had decided to stop traveling and settle down somewhere. However, that was not the case. In fact, Rifin had written a contract stating that all slaves were free, and once he put his seal, all of them would no longer be slaves of Tarek. On the other hand, letting these guys go who didn't even have a home was just self-satisfaction of his supposed justice. By such an action, he would most likely expose them to other dangers. First and foremost, he had to teach them how to survive in this world. After a while, a rather interesting company gathered in Sivolt Tauban's office. The merchant found out that the slaves who had arrived were Tarek's and asked our hero in bewilderment if he had bought them all. Rifin replied that he would find out later, but in the meantime, he had a request to take care of them in secret. He also added that he would hear interesting news tomorrow morning, and the one to figure out the truth of the matter would be he. And if the secret came out, the only suspect would be him alone. While Sivolt was thinking about what he was up to, our hero told him not to worry too much about it because it was just a simple threat. In the next moment, he also threw a pile of gold on the table. In Rifin's opinion, 100 gold coins should have been enough for him to take care of the slaves, but from the expression on the merchant's face, he could easily tell that it was too much. Sivolt immediately thought that he must have robbed the Rolifane estate, but he did not refuse the deal. He told our hero that he had a place near Zeppelin, and if he put slaves there, no one would know about it. Rifin also wanted Sivolt to promise that no one would touch them or treat them as slaves but him. Sivolt replied that he would definitely see to that, but 100 coins as payment still seemed too much for him. Our hero replied that he also wanted him to use the money for their training. Sivolt Tauban was surprised, because he thought that they had already been educated as slaves of Tariq. However, Rifin was not talking about slave education. Language and numbers, depending on how they do, accounting, history, philosophy as well. If possible, medicine and healing too. Those were the things he had to teach them. Sivolt Tauban couldn't understand why Rifin would go to such an extent for some slaves, so he asked about it. Our hero replied that there was nothing strange about it. The more skilled a slave was, the more convenient it was for his owner. However, the merchant didn't believe that a slave could learn something like that. Rifin replied that he would understand in time, but in the meantime they talked about his money. He should not worry about anything, but just do what he asked. After a moment's thought, Sivolt replied that he would try, but he also clarified that it would be difficult to do so, since few people would be willing to teach a slave. Our hero knew very well that teachers were very arrogant people. However, even so, he had a solution. Teachers always had students, so they were their salvation. Among the students, one could always find a few peasants who were in need of money. Sivolt Tauban understood what our hero was suggesting, but he could not understand how students who hadn't finished their studies could teach. Rifin was not going to demand some high level of education. He just wanted them to get the basics. Eventually, Sivolt Tauban gave up and agreed to fulfill this assignment. But he still didn't believe that the slaves could learn anything. In his opinion, it was like teaching math to a dog or a cat. In fact, slave training was not such a wonder. In our hero's past life, there had been a few people who had suggested the idea, but the upper class and most slave owners didn't accept it. Like Sivolt, they also compared it to training animals, all because of the stereotype that other races were inferior to humans. But even so, Rifin intended to use that stereotype as an advantage. The stereotype was just a cover. The real reason why the nobles didn't want to train slaves was because it was a great measure against their resistance. The smarter and more educated a slave was, the better chance he had of escaping or rebelling. Once the slaves started getting educated, Sivolt Tauban would be sure to be shocked at how capable they really were. And once he realized this, he would begin to educate his own slaves. After all, it was much more convenient for the owner if his slave was skilled. And if things went smoothly, the trend of training slaves could spread across the continent. Changing people's minds was what Rifin wanted, and what he had failed to accomplish in his previous life. Now was the time to start it. After a while, our heroes returned to the inn. As it turned out, Rifin was back to where he started. He had no money again. So he reluctantly began to ask Scylla if he had any money. At Scylla's puzzled look, our hero replied that he had accidentally given all the money to Sivolt. Upon hearing this, Cirrus immediately asked if she had to return her outfit to get the refund. Rifin replied in a panic that she didn't have to, nor did she have to worry about the situation. He didn't notice, but that was the first time she had ever laughed ever since becoming a slave. As one might expect, the next morning at Zeppelin was restless. The reason for this was that 2 dead bodies were discovered, which belonged to the Great Trade Union Rolifane's leader Tarek and the Karen Trade Union's successor Beret. The culprits were unknown, as none of the guards remembered almost nothing. Eventually, the case was dismissed for lack of evidence and confusion. 2 weeks later, our heroes went to clean up another dungeon. The battle with monsters was impressive. While Scylla was getting rid of the undead with holy magic, Cirrus was effortlessly destroying skeletons with her blade. Ryfin, who was observing all of this, noted that they worked really well together, while the skeletons continued to persistently try to destroy the obsidian with the stone pickaxe. But more specifically, Scylla was adjusting to Ceres' needs. In simple terms, he was the best support. Ryfin was curious to know how old he was when he started entering the battlefield to achieve this. Scylla was much stronger and more capable than our hero had expected. He guessed that if he continued to improve at this rate, he could become a stronger priest than his arch-nemesis, Saintess Eileen. Ryfin even wondered why he had not become famous in his past life. As it turned out, these ruins were too tedious for Scylla. In his opinion, the monsters here were stronger than in Palton. If we talk about how our heroes ended up here, they arrived in the Kingdom of Grame 2 weeks after traveling to Chatan. It was there, near the Settlard Mountains, that the forgotten ancient ruins of Eleusion were located. The reason they had come here was because it was the place where Ryfin could restore his magical power. Just like that, they found themselves in front of a door that was sealed with magical power. There seemed to be no way out, because it was impossible to open the door with physical force. But as it turned out, there was no need, for Ryfin began to cast a spell. Scylla was surprised and incredulously asked if he could really use magic. After confirming this, Scylla froze in shock, for he had never heard of a martial mage. He couldn't help but be jealous, for in front of him was a person who not only had excellent martial skills, but could also use magic. That wasn't fair at all. But after a moment, it turned out that Ryfin was very bad with magic. In fact, even for a third circle spell, it took him a long time to accumulate mana. Not paying attention to Scylla's barbed remarks, our hero continued to persistently cast the spell. And after a moment, a miracle happened. The door finally lit up with a bright light. Simply put, he was able to open the door, though with difficulty. It took him 30 minutes. It was so pitiful that Scylla advised him not to tell anyone else that he was a mage. In his past life, Ryfin had been the world's first 10-circle mage, and so he could no longer tolerate the fact that he was now so bad at magic. He had to get Eleusion's voice as soon as possible. However, when he arrived at the right place, nothing but disappointment awaited him. After all, the place where the artifact was supposed to be was completely empty. Not quite empty. In the corner stood some strange branch, which did not look like some expensive artifact at all. Finding nothing else, our heroes made the decision to head back. Ryfin was particularly disappointed, as he couldn't believe that it had turned out this way. Scylla reassured him, saying that they could not always be the first. The problem was that according to our hero's memories, Eleusion was to be discovered only after 17 years, and it was he, in a past life, who had found it first. There was only one conclusion to draw from this. The future had changed. Scylla and Cirrus were still happy because they had gotten something after all. Scylla thought that this strange branch must be a good artifact. And so it was. In the next instant, the branch glowed with a bright green light and turned into a magical bow. It had the name Nihilin, and it shot magical arrows created from mana. Depending on how concentrated the wielder was, the number of shots that could be fired in a row depended on how much concentration he had. It looked like an ordinary stick, but it was actually a branch of the Elfenheim Tree of Life. Well, what was to be expected from such an artifact? Its power was incredible. Everyone was impressed by its power, and even Cirrus confirmed that it was an excellent weapon. But there was still one outstanding question. Turning to our hero, Scylla asked how he even realized that this old branch was an artifact. Ryfin couldn't answer that it was Ceres' main weapon in his past life, so he simply said that he had heard of it before. Scylla continued his futile attempts to comfort our hero, telling him how many more ancient ruins there were on the continent. But all those ruins were not enough, for none of them contained a relic that could replace Eleusion's voice. After all, it was the only artifact that could help our hero restore his magical powers. Finally, they arrived at the village of Gahalan, and Scylla couldn't wait to eat the food that someone else had prepared. Since when they travel, it was always him who did the cooking, and his dream came true. As soon as they entered the local tavern, a rich table was set before them. The tavern lady was quite pleased that they enjoyed her food so much. It wasn't surprising, though, as her cooking skills were top tier, though not everyone shared her opinion. For example, she had recently had guests who were always complaining about the food. They must have thought they were food critics. There was a group of knights from a noble family here a week ago. They were all talking amongst themselves about exploring some ruins or something similar. When our hero heard that, he immediately tensed, and offered to tell her more about them for an extra fee. But she refused the money and agreed to tell everything for nothing, because telling stories is not a job. A week ago, Viscount Kelberin arrived here with the Explore team, but surprisingly those who arrived with Viscount looked even higher in rank than him. One of the knights was even fully armed in gold. She even had fun watching him, all shiny from head to toe. Though he was nice. Ryfin listened to her intently and put the facts together in his head. The golden armor and the golden sword, it couldn't be mistaken for anything else. There was only one person that fit that description, the Golden Knight of the Graham Kingdom's Count Tennis family. Many miles away from our hero in Kelberin's castle, two noble men were dining, Sir Eustace and Viscount Kelberin. Kelberin couldn't stop praising the noble knight for the way he had skillfully eliminated all the monsters in the ruins, but he didn't consider it all his own merits, and thanked Kelberin for his help. But the latter still did not calm down, and told him without stopping that it was expected from the Golden Knight of Graham. And what an honor it was for him to be able to witness his incredible skills. All this stream of flattery was for a reason, and Sir Eustace, who was Tennis family's knight commander, decided to assure him that he could not worry. After all, a third of all the treasures found in the ruins would be his as they had agreed before. Money was not important to Viscount Kelberin, at least that's what he said. He pretended that the honor of fighting alongside Sir Eustace was enough for him and that he didn't need the relic at all. He didn't even mind Sir Eustace taking all the treasures found there, because he knew that he had enough money as it was, and it would be much more profitable to get a good relationship with Sir Eustace. Then over their small talk, they discussed what Viscount Kelberin had done with the adamante and orichalcum that were found on his lands. As it turned out, he had ordered his slaves to mine it for weapons. Sir Eustace was not at all surprised, for the Kelberin family was known for its mining industry and for having many talented blacksmiths among the slave dwarves. It came about that Viscount Kelberin used this opportunity to introduce such a high-ranking guest to his two daughters. Even though Sir Eustace was married, he thought it would be good for them to get to know him. But the guest thought otherwise and replied that he was not going to even come within a few meters of any woman other than his wife. Such an answer was very strange to Kelberin. Had he offended him in some way? According to rumors, he was a very unfaithful husband. Immersed in his thoughts, Kelberin had the imprudence to think aloud of the guest's younger sibling. Immediately, there was the sound of breaking glass. Sir Eustace crushed his glass and declared in a quiet, threatening voice that he had no younger sibling. Then the frightened Viscount Kelberin realized that he had made a grave mistake and began to apologize, but it was too late. Kelberin was saved by a loud noise outside, which shook the whole castle. A servant flew into the room and shouted that a demon has appeared from one of the relics, a horrible centaur-like demon, also known as Sephiatan. He had appeared right in the middle of the inner courtyard of the fortress and was now smashing everything around him, scattering soldiers and stones like garbage. Sir Eustace watched from the window, wondering if there was any artifact that could summon this monster. Suddenly, what he saw made him pale. That stupid bastard, his cousin. There was one guy among the knights who took command amidst the chaos and ordered everyone to keep an eye on the monster sword, evacuate people, and maintain the formation. The mages he sent to the back line, and he ordered the knights to raise their shields. He himself stepped forward. At his command, the mages prepared a freezing spell to hold the demon in place. And soon the Will of Ice spell bound the demon with a multitude of ice crystals. Now that the monster was trapped, it was time to spring into action. The others were sure that this was enough, and all they had to do was keep going and wait for the commander to show up. But not this guy, whose name was Russ. The rest of the warriors were shocked at what he was about to do. But that didn't stop him. He believed that the evil demon right in front of him was no enemy in front of Tennis's sword. With a battle cry, he lunged at the demon. But despite his determination, he could only scratch the monster slightly. Soon his joyous expression at having struck the demon was soon replaced by fear and the realization that he couldn't dodge the blow, so he had to block it. His sword broke and he fell, and flew back a few meters. One of his friends came to his aid. While Russ was recovering, the irreparable happened. The demon swung his sword again, and right in front of Russ, his friend was blown to pieces. And so did the ice that was holding the demon back. He only managed to whisper in a trembling voice, "Brother." Luckily, their commander Eustace had already arrived and ordered stupid idiots like this one off the battlefield, and the mages to maintain the ice ring. He looked at Russ and asked contemptuously, "Who is his brother?" The great knights of Tennis are not born from the stomachs of dirty stray dogs. Russ dared not even reply. Sir Eustace was immediately confronted by the demon Sephiatan, and decided to see if it was really a demon that no aura user could stand up to. Eustace had one very powerful argument, his giant golden sword, which he wielded masterfully. It was a magical sword that allowed the user to gain power equal to an aura user. It was called Eldrad, and now Eustace began to cast a spell to awaken it. The sword glowed, and a multitude of golden particles began to separate from it. They began to surround and attach themselves to Eustace, completely covering him in magical golden armor. creating an invulnerable magical armor. Now in full armor, he was ready to fight the demon, and to the cheering shouts of his soldiers, he said, "Come, demon of the Otherworld." At the same time, many miles away, our hero in a quiet inn kept talking about this very golden night. And Sillin was quite surprised that Rifen didn't know such a famous person, but he justified it by the fact that he lived all the time in the mountains. Still, it was strange that he didn't know the strongest magical swordsman on the continent, so strong that he could even be compared to an aura user. Even Cirrus, being a slave, had heard of him. However, although Rifen didn't know who wore these artifacts at this time, he was well aware of their properties. Paying attention to Cirrus, our hero couldn't help but notice how good her pajamas looked, and asked if she felt good in them. But still returning to the topic of their conversation, Sillin didn't understand how they could compare even a strong magical swordsman to an aura user. It's just the power of a magic tool, after all. But Rifen corrected him that this Eldrad magic armor is not simple at all. It is considered the strongest magic armor of the current age, although being able to proficiently use that is another issue altogether. This artifact is made of a special material, true gold Eldril, which is a magic metal several times rarer than true silver mithril. The magic armor Eldrad and magic sword Eldrin, both made from that true gold, is the highest-ranking artifact from the relics of the Silver Age, and has been passed down through the Tennis County for generations. The magic swordsman who uses Eldrad and Eldrin is called the Golden Knight. Those who wear these both powerful artifacts can activate incredibly powerful magic just by simple declaration. It's allowing user to gain access to fighting power on par with an aura user. Right at this moment, Eustace finished reciting the spell, saying, "Let me become a feather that rides the wind." The only question was whether he would be able to use this power properly, and judging by his movements, he had learned the experience of generations before him very well. His sword cut through the demon's flesh like a knife through butter, and he jumped high above the monster, preparing to deliver another devastating blow. To do so, he awakened his Eldrin sword, which immediately burst into flames. The demon only had time to let out one last howl. Before the full power of the sword, along with the 8th circle spell, material destruction fell upon him. That he could use such spells was not surprising, for the Tennis County is at least a family that's researched how to properly use Eldrad's power. However, just because he has a strong tool doesn't mean it's always absolutely strong. Such statements from our hero surprised Sillin, who knew that aura users usually don't recognize magical swordsmen. And the reason was simple, simply because Tennis County's magic armor utilization techniques are more profound than most sword techniques. Eustace's actions on the battlefield clearly demonstrated this. From what Rifen had heard about the family, they had lost their proper sword techniques and had to rely on relics, but from their family's perspective, that's actually better. Even if Air worked hard to polish his sword techniques, he can't be sure of becoming an aura user. But there'll always be one golden knight in each generation, and always having a such strong warrior with the force of an aura user in the family is a great benefit. Well, Eustace is no doubt capable, and the way he was skillfully going to finish the demon with another spell was impressive. Finally, after such a blow, a flash of light struck him, and he once again slashed the demon's flesh with a hail of lightning-fast blows. But this time was the last, and the demon began to fall to the ground to the enthusiastic shouts of the soldiers. Only Russ watched this with an absent expression on his face. The Golden Knight. Eustace bathed in the rays of glory and the setting sun on the background of the defeated enemy. It was with this murderous machine that our hero would have to fight soon, and Rifen himself wondered if he could win. Which of them would be stronger?
So, a magic swordsman who wields Eldrad. The mist of cold snow obscures the earth. He thinks this is going to be tricky. After seeing him, Reifenhart thinks that he can defeat him. Meanwhile, he is talking to Sillin. She says, "Don't tell me you're thinking of fighting the Count of Teens." Reifenhart replies, "We have to retrieve the artifact." Sillin questions him that, "Are you saying we're going to steal now?" She also said that in the Principality of Chatton, I cooperated with you because you were right. But Count Teens explored the ruins himself and became the rightful owner of the artifact. There's nothing wrong with that. Then Reifenhart realized and said taking that artifact from him is essentially stealing, isn't it? Oh, you're right. He thinks, how do I persuade her without bringing up my past life? He said to Sallin, as a fellow comrade, I think I need to tell you about this. I've mentioned before that I'm from Jim Unbreakable, right? Sallin replied, yes, I've heard you were a disciple of the Fist King Gerard. Right. Though you see, to pass through the teachings of our school, there are a few trials. Sallin said, so you're saying your master placed the artifact in the ruins and asked you to retrieve it, right? He replied, yeah, it's a tradition to train the disciples. Our clan can be pretty crude, you see. She said that means Master Gerard has already explored the Aleutian ruins once. Yet he didn't touch any of the Silver Age artifacts inside? Then he replied that's because the other artifacts obtained during that time are rewards for the disciples. Reifenhart said to her, think about it. How else would I have recognized Nylon unless I'd heard about it in advance? If the ruins were truly unexplored, I wouldn't have known any of the side roads. She said, you're right. If that's the case, I guess there's no helping it. I understand now. But Reifenhart thinks in his mind that sorry, Sillin, it's not totally a lie though. In a weird expression, he also thinks no wonder I found it strange. No matter how valuable the Silver Age artifacts are, I didn't think you'd covet someone else's belonging. She said, so you basically need to retrieve that artifact at all costs, right? He replied, yeah, that's why I'm worried. This whole matter's completely twisted. Is stealing really the only option we have, Salin said. Reifenhart replied, what can we do since things have turned out this way? Well done, Sir Eustace. As expected, even a demon like Sephiatin stands no chance against the Golden Knight. Commander Eustace said, wrap things up, everyone. Sir Lot, I'm leaving it to you. A swordsman using a technique with only a downward slash is no longer a swordsman of teens. Get a grip of where you belong, Russ. I'm still a swordsman of teens, no matter what you think, he replied. The next day, we see Russ practicing with his sword in the field. He is trying very hard and with full commitment. Then two men called him from behind and said, hey, Russ, why did you pull that stupid stunt yesterday? He replied, I was only trying to take out that demon. Then one of them shouts on him, saying that did someone ask you to do that? Didn't you hear the orders to wait until the captain arrives? In anger, Russ replied, I'm also a swordsman of teens. He also said, if you have a problem with that, challenge me to a duel. I'll take you head on. Then they started leaving from there and said that he is a filthy mongrel. In other words, he is a dirty beggar. Russ is strong, but he knows only one sword skill. Downward slash and the breathing technique that accompanies it. The blade carves a perfect trajectory through the air. The timing so impeccable that the actions in the middle are invisible. A master of the sword would have spared no praise for his excellent strike. But the execution of his sword techniques, other than downward slash, was sloppy beyond compare. After that he started thinking that the House of Teens had forgotten true swordsmanship. But as a noble family with a legacy of knights, they had sword techniques for their knights. However, Russ never learnt those techniques. This should be all that I can teach you, I'm sorry, my son. Since he was a bastard, the vassals voiced their opposition and disallowed Russ from learning proper swordsmanship. In the end, his father passed down only a single thing to him. This is a fragment of the great sword path that was originally possessed by our family. It's also a true path towards Aura. You might just be able to awaken this forgotten power. His father had hopes, and Russ didn't want to let down those expectations. The true sword of teens, which was once able to draw out great power, and its only remnant, the downward slashing sword path. All in all, a trashy sword art forgotten by everyone. He can never get there with just a single downward slash. After all, the remaining fragments of the sword path have already disappeared. That fool. However, I thought that a rascal was a genius. Then suddenly something fast-moving objects is seen. We see a strange masked man. While moving, he said, I can't believe all the shit I'm doing after being born again. Wearing a mask and jumping over the fence. Seriously. After looking at the castle, he thinks, why is this country lord's castle so damn grand? Ah, right. Viscount Kelberin established himself through mining. This must be the work of dwarves. After that he saw 3 guards going inside the castle. Then he attacked them so quickly that they couldn't do anything. Inside of the castle, 2 guards were talking with each other. One of them said that I didn't get the lord, Grain already has the Golden Knight. Who would dare invade this place for him to call us as well? Then the other guard also said the knights from the capital have a resounding shine coming from their armor as well. He replied, you're right about that. Our lord is a knight too, but they're in a different class. All of a sudden they noticed something, but it was too late because the masked man quietly came between them and stuck to the ceiling without them knowing. While hanging on the ceiling, he thought, so thieves don't stick to the ceiling like lizards for no reason, huh? After giving it a shot, thievery isn't that big a deal either. I might have a talent for it. He also knocked out all the men who were present in the corridor. After looking at the guards who stand in front of the gate, he thinks, as per the guards, those guys with impressive-looking gear must be Teens Knights. Without wasting time, the masked man attacked both of them so quickly with his glaring eyes. While grabbing the guard's head, he said submissions are really the best for silent takedown. After that, he stands in front of the castle and thinks, so this is it. But when he tries to enter, something suspicious is stopping him. Then he thinks, is that a motion detection barrier and a heat detection spell? I get what it is, but the fact that I can't disarm it is really annoying. If it's a magical barrier, its core must be somewhere around here. Found it. The runes are engraved inside the stone. But then he smashes and destroys the rune with his one hand. He entered into a basement or warehouse where a secret anti-magic treasure, sealing jar, infinite bag, and even heavenly harp is there. Looking at these things, he thinks that I missed these materials. It looks like they categorized them. But who did it? This isn't a Helshin blade, but a Talad sword. They look similar, but their magic formulas are completely different. I can't. Then he found something more valuable and said, there it is, Lucian's voice. But unfortunately his foot touched a rubber strip, which is a trap. Then he looked around and suddenly the alarm started ringing so loudly that the castle security got alert easily. After looking at this, he gets afraid and shocked and realizes that it is a meager, simple thread trap. The people living inside the castle were all scared along with the king and his wife. When he listens to some voices like there's an invader in the southern tower. Then he runs from there, and while running he thought, I got through all the harder obstacles just to fall for an idiotic trap like that? I should leave robbing to the thieves. And the guards who are trying to catch him have failed. He also thinks that I feel like they might die if I hit them a bit wrong, but it's hard to hold back my strength. Then we see a large number of guards along with a magician using a fire spell to stop him. The magician charges him with his flaming power, but he grabs a guard and puts it in front of him to use him as a shield. After looking at this, the magician is amazed and says that using a person as a shield, how evil can you be? The masked man thinks that I only did it since his armor was imbued with a blessing. Then a guard commanded others to fire. Still, he effortlessly blocked all the attacks with just his hand because he's none other than Reincarnates, who came here to steal a precious artifact. But suddenly he realizes the main problem because the guards catched him with the help of iron chains. Then he thinks that they were trying to restrain my movements instead of capturing me. Not bad. Damn it. They're using all kinds of skills for just being a knight. But unexpectedly, Russ throws away his shield and runs towards Rifin while saying that you are a criminal. Have a taste of the sword of teens. The knight tries to stop him, and after seeing him, Rifin thinks, who is that idiot? The knight again commanded not to break formation, but he didn't stop. Russ ran fastly towards him, but Reincarnates thought that he hadn't heard that name before. Is it just my imagination? His movements, breathing, and steps are all very ordinary. However, what is with that swing? When Russ attacks on him, a lot of smoke and dust surrounds the area. The attack did nothing to Rifin, but his chains were broken, and he was free. Then he kicked him so hard that Russ fell very far to the ground. After judging the attack of Russ, he thinks he can swing as powerfully as he just did, but he can't dodge this. He's not very well-rounded. After some time, Rifin noticed something and said, Blade of the Heavens, tear through space. All of a sudden, a bright yellow light appeared in front of him. Because of it, he is hardly able to open his eyes. Then he saw Eustace, the Golden Knight of Graham. And the Golden Knight said, your skills are too high level for a common trespasser. After listening to him, Rifin replied, oh, well, I have my reasons. He replied that you can tell me about that later. Then he started moving rapidly towards the Golden Knight with his electrifying eyes. In response to it, the knight also changed at him with full power and strength. Just before the action, they both glare at each other, which shows their confidence and self-esteem. Both of them attacked each other and both dodged and survived. The attacks of both collided with each other and both went away because of that. After looking at them fighting, the guards were confused about what Sir Eustace was doing. But on the battlefield, they both think that their attacks didn't work. Then, unexpectedly, the Golden Knight rages and says, "I shall become the shadow of the abyss and roar." But Reifenhardt acknowledged that he was using a howling shadow. Then he goes to attack him by cutting the clouds of smoke. Meanwhile, Eustace thinks that how does he know Howling Shadow's weak point? "You're proficient in countering magic spells." Reifen replied, "Well, I know most of them." But he doesn't realize that the Golden Knight is above him and ready to attach with his sword. But he survived that attack. There was very little gap between the sword and his head. Many times he attacked on the Reifen, but he dodged all the attacks with his speed and agility. But at the end, Eustace, the Golden Knight, got a hard punch by Reifenhardt. That pain was visible on his face, and he started thinking that it had that much impact despite the armor. Wind becomes narrow. Flames gather together and strike thy enemy. Awaken Eldrin. But then Reifen saw the massive fire blast coming towards him. He thinks I might actually end up dead at this rate. Then suddenly there was a big explosion on one side of the castle. And when the smoke cleared, he appeared to us in fine and good condition. After that he thinks, is that a material destruction? You're telling me he can cast high-level magic like that too? The Golden Knight also thinks that how did he block that move? No, there's no way he'd be that fine if he did. But I didn't see him move to avoid it either. For me to have missed his movements despite my vision transcending human limits. Could he be an aura user then? When Eustace, the Golden Knight, saw him standing, he again rages with his powers and speaks breath of corrosion cuts through space. In response to it, Reifenhardt also shows his skills. He uses Mist of Acid, and he thinks that I can destroy that with just a bit of wind pressure. Then he hit his foot sharply on the ground, and the ground cracked badly. He uses his first along with high air pressure, continually punches on the Golden Knight. Because of it, he also realizes his fastness. The Golden Knight also confirmed that he is an aura user, and also thinks that I was at a disadvantage because I was unable to get a proper grasp of his skill level. But now that I know that he's an aura user, it's a different story. If the opponent is an aura user, I just need to respond accordingly. The Sword of Teens does not fall behind in power when it comes to aura. On the other hand, Reifenhardt is also thinking something in his mind that he's different to deal with. I thought aura users were the most annoying to deal with before, but magic is just as annoying. When the guards outside saw an explosion inside the castle, they got scared. While attacking, Eustace said, "I don't understand why someone skilled enough to be an aura user would commit such a petty crime." After that, Reifen also thinks, did he notice that I'm an aura user? I wasn't using the golden aura of the gym Unbreakable because it's way too conspicuous. But I can't use it now just because he noticed. How strange. That kind of physical prowess is only possible for an aura user. Yet he's not using aura. I assume it hasn't been long since you awakened your aura, Eustace, the Golden Knight thinks. Then he's no match for me, and straightly strike down to the ground. So, finally he activates the awakened Eldrin and requests to permit him the power to destroy all in the world. Looking at this situation, Reifenhardt was shocked and said, "Damn it, this one's really dangerous." "Light of Eldrin," said Golden Knight. Reifenhardt is not able to move and thinks, what a golden light. Then he crossed his arms to block the attack, and while doing, he said, "Thank God you're the Golden Knight." Then the Golden Knight breaks the invisible shield, which is a spiral guard activated by our Reifen. Suddenly the light flashed, and no one could see anything. There was a huge explosion, after which nothing was visible. But Reifenhardt managed to escape from there because he was in no condition to fight. His strength was completely exhausted. After looking at him, the Golden Knight thinks it's impossible. He's blocked the Light of Eldrin. While going, he also knew that he was a bit late on using the spiral guard. After that he jumps from the tall wall of the castle and falls hard on the ice surface. Sir Lot and Eustace gather together at the boundary from where he falls. Sir Lot asked, "Are you all right, Sir Eustace?" Sir Eustace replied, "Go check on the relic, Sir Lot. We need to know what it is that they stole. Please get together a search party too. We cannot let that man escape." Sir Lot again asked, "You don't think he's dead?" Eustace answered, "He definitely wouldn't have died from that." So now we move back to Cirrus and Scylla, where Cirrus woke up from sleep. Due to which, Scylla also woke up and asked her, "What is it, Cirrus?" She replied, "I have a bad feeling." "I don't know, I just have a bad feeling." Scylla asked her again, "Do you think something happened to Ryfin?" In the town, Cirrus is running on the roof while grabbing Scylla in her hand because many guards are chasing them. Scylla said to Cirrus that "I'm a man, you know. This is a bit emasculating." After that, a local person informs that guard that they both ran away this way. Then the guards stopped both of them from the front and said, "There is nowhere for you to run. Put down your weapon and surrender." Looking at this situation, Cirrus uses her magic called Nylon, which is a green sticky fluid-like structure. Then we see Eustace there, and he asks Sir Lot what is going on. He replied, "I apologize, Sir Eustace, they're not ordinary criminals." Eustace answered that "That's enough, I'll take care of it myself." After dealing with the guards, Cirrus called Scylla, and she replied, Yeah, you can carry me. I wonder when Ryfin is going to teach me muscle training and my ego as a man." And as soon as Cirrus realized the danger, she picked up Scylla and jumped away from there. Then the Golden Knight appeared in front of them and said, "That's enough, you rats." And when she saw him, she understood that he's a Grain Golden Knight. He notices her sword and thinks that's no ordinary sword. "You're telling me he gave this mere elf a sword as rare as that? Dear Philanens, please permit your loyal subjects the bravery of a lion. A high-ranking priest on top of that. Please permit your subjects the power of a giant in the arms, the eyes of a hawk, and the legs of a sturdy ox to strike down the enemy. So I was right in thinking that they're no ordinary thieves." After that, Scylla thanks Ryfin. That idiot, he got caught. No wonder Cirrus had such a bad feeling. Then the fight between Cirrus and the Golden Knight starts. He hits her tightly and she falls away. Both of them were in full anger and frustrated. Now we can see that Riefenhart has come to his senses, and he thinks that he is ruined because fighting someone wearing the strongest armor in the world with a shackle on. He made a damn stupid decision there. But then he stood up, encouraging himself that, well, at least I got something out of it. I actually got a Lucian's voice. But when he started wondering where he was, someone came and asked him, "Oh, you're awake. How are you feeling now?" After looking at him, Riefenhart thinks, a dwarf. Then he tells him that his name is Hethos. Ryfin also tells his name, and then Hethos said to him that it might be hard for you to get up right now. Do you think you can eat? Also Hethos said to his female assistant that that's good, Miss Tilla, fetch some barley porridge for him. After looking at his assistant, Riefenhart thinks a kid. No, it's actually a fully grown dwarf woman, and also she is a dwarf warrior Tilla Steelhammer. Then the dwarf woman said to Ryfin that I'm glad you regained consciousness and gave him something to eat. After that, Ryfin thinks that's strange. A dwarf wouldn't normally be friendly to humans. My question was answered as soon as the old dwarf they called Elder appeared. While entering, the old dwarf said, "Oh, you're awake. Our savior. He is Olpoth, priest Gelfide Delphistone." Riefenhart is dumbfounded when he heard savior. Then he tells Ryfin that 6 years ago, our great priest received a message from Olpoth. A man of steel physique and sublime knowledge shall appear through the dark path, riding on the fears of the northern wind. Follow him. He is one who shall become the savior and change the course of fate. For more explanation, a big, muscular dude who's also smart will come floating down on ice water from a cave, so save him and treat him as the savior. The great priest secretly notified all dwarves of the continent of this message, and afterwards, Gelfide has been waiting every winter for this savior. After listening to all that, Riefenhart gives an annoying expression and thinks Olpoth went back on his words. Olpoth is the god of the dwarves, who would occasionally bestow diving messages to the dwarves. 6 years ago is right when I regressed. That means Olpoth gave that message as soon as I came back. Ryfin also thinks that he was fast, and I already messed things up once, but I guess he's got my back once again. What a good man, I mean good god. Thank you for trusting me once again. I'll try to do better this time. So you did all this for me just because of that message. After that he asked to Hethos, so you did all this for me just because of that message. He replied, Olpoth does not make mistakes. Meanwhile, Tilla came to see Reifenhardt's condition, and she said that you've healed very quickly. He thanked her, and she replied, I haven't done anything other than make barley porridge for you. But Ryfen thinks I would have healed faster if she had fed me meat though. Then she said, if you're feeling better, should I call Priest Gelfide? He said he has something to talk to you about. Reifenhardt answered, I'll go and find him. She then helps Ryfen to go to Priest Gelfide and tells him that these people are from the Steelhammer tribe. They're a tribe of mountain dwarves that live as slaves in the Kelbrin Viscounty. Unlike elves and orcs, they have been maintaining their traditions and culture. And this is because the use of dwarves as slaves are different from those two species. Dwarves are the only kind to be used for technical jobs, and this is because humans cannot learn their skills. Dwarves only work well when kept in their societal groups, so they are sold as units, which allowed them to maintain their culture. They were also able to maintain their faith, so the presence of priests did not disappear. All these things Tilla explained to Reifenhardt while walking. After that, Ryfen thinks that thanks to that, I got a lot of help from the dwarves when constructing our empire. They're the only kind amongst the other worldly species with an understanding of how societies work. Then he asks Tilla how many live here. She answered about 60. Then he again asks if all of you belong to Viscount Kelbrin. She said yes, we're all Viscount Kelbrin's slaves. After that, Reifenhardt looked around and noticed that there were no men. Tilla explains to him that the men are usually in the mines of the Settlard Mountain. In order to prevent uprisings, the humans take the dwarves' family members hostage. Ryfen said sorry to ask that question. Then they reached a strange massive gate. Gelfide Delphistone joined them and said to Ryfen that, Dear Savior, welcome. You look much better. Well, thanks to you all, anyway, just call me Reifenhardt. Gelfide laughed and replied, To be honest, we don't know why you're the savior either. I can tell just from your eyes that you don't see us as slaves. Ryfen said, It is true that I have an affinity for dwarves and see them as equals. It is true that I have an affinity for dwarves and see them as equals, but changing the fate of an entire species, that's a whole other problem. Gelfide answered, We do not know either why Olpoth has chosen a human to be our kind savior. We just hold on to the hope given by our God and do our best. The oracle wasn't a lie. Of course, no one knows how you are supposed to save us. My duty now is to cooperate the best I can with you. He also said that you're pretty strange too. You looked like you already knew when I told you that you are our savior. With a weird expression, Ryfen said, Well, I guess so. After that, Reifenhardt asked him, What did you want to talk to me about? He answered, The great priest wishes to see you. Then Ryfen thinks the great priest who? He said Olpoth's high priest Mashelin, the pillar of all dwarves. Then Reifenhardt asked him, He was a high priest 30 years ago too. I see. I shall meet him then. After that, Gelfide replied, Interestingly, I thought that you would consider all of this as nonsense. I was worried about how to explain it all to you. Humans cannot hear the sound of truth, unlike us. So it's just very surprising that you are acting as if you understand all of this. Ryfen smiles and thinks in my past life the Antair's empire fell. It's still possible that I'll just repeat the past. Mashelin is a wise dwarf, so maybe I can come up with a better idea by talking to him. Mashelin should be at the Grand Forge right now, not that far. Gelfide tells him that Mashelin is currently in the Great Temple of Olpoth in Grand Forge. Of course, only a very few dwarves know of its location. So you will need to take a guide. She's the only one remaining in our tribe with warrior blood, and then Tilla comes there and tells him that I'm Tilla Steelhammer, I'll be your guide. Gelfide informs Reifenhart that you seem to know a lot about us. I heard the sound of your mind. It sounded as if you already knew that we have a high priest and even the location of the Grand Forge. He also said that the humans who know that dwarves can hear the sound of truth do not like to speak to us. After listening to all that, Reifenhart replied, I do know that. You really do know? Gelfide asked in a wondering expression. Reifen answered, Can you tell me how you know so much about us? I apologize, but it is not yet time. Suddenly Hethos came running to Reifen and said, Hey, Mr. Savior. Then Gelfide asked him what happened, Hethos. He replied, Didn't you have companions? An elf and a young boy. I think your companions have been imprisoned in Viscount Kelbrin's castle. Reifenhart got scared after listening about them. Then we see Eustace, the Golden Knight, who was fighting with Cirrus last time. But now he is shouting and saying we need to find where the thief is hiding no matter what. Forget honor for now. It does not matter what kind of torturing you subject them to. And he commanded 2 guards to make them talk. Then Eustace thinks an elf who has an advanced magic sword that only a knight captain or higher would use, and a Phalanx priest with enough divine power to be an archbishop. I'll find out all that I can about you. After that, both guards are discussing with each other that how are they supposed to torture them? Do they just hit them? What if they die? Other guards said, I think we're supposed to hurt them, but not kill them. That sounds difficult. Anyway, it was an order. We'll have to do our best. What will gonna happen next to find out? Just do like, share, and comment if you want the next part as soon as possible. And also help us by giving supers because your one support motivates us a lot to make such type of content. Thanks for watching, sayonara.